Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto has dragon inheritance naru x erogen. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by TenchiSaWaDa, link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Here we go. Erogen and Murda had been traveling for several days now. They had been through the desert, a jail, several swords, and many fights. Over the time you could say they have grown in companionship. But the news of Murda's ancestry was troubling indeed. Saphira and Erogen had decided not to waver on their thoughts that Murda was still a true friend, but they were still suspicious in the crevices of their hearts. They were only a day from the Varden, nearing in the approach. Erogen coughed as he climbed the next cliff while leading Snowfire. They had been on the move for quite some time now. They had been riding or climbing for most of the day. When they needed to sleep, they slept on their horses to pass through the mountains, alternating who lead and who would sleep. Erogen reached into Snowfire's saddle pouch and pulled out the wine skin. He took a slow drink and then tossed it to Murda, who was leading Cornac. Murda deftly caught it and took a drink as well. Murda passed the wineskin back so that Erogen could put it back. Erogen looked forward as he saw smoke rising above them. Murda, Erogen whispered out as he nodded towards the smoke. Murda nodded, drawing his sword. Erogen did as well and slowly crept on the edge of the cliff to see where the smoke was coming from. Erogen squinted as he looked at the origin of the smoke. A fire was being tended to by a person. He did not see a horse, but rather a small pack hanging to the side. No glimmer of weapons, visible that was, but still this person seemed to be camping out in the middle of the mountains. Erogen looked at Murda, who looked back. Do you think it is a trap? Murda shook his head. Impossible, the Urgels would just attack us. They aren't crafty enough to set up this kind of ambush. Erogen nodded. Let's scout it out. Erogen and Murda led the horses about 50 paces away from the fire. Far enough so the horses could not be heard, but close enough so that they could run the horses if there was any danger. Erogen had contacted Saphira to let her know their encounter. She was waiting on one of the higher cliffs, ready to swoop down to protect them. Erogen moved slowly towards the fire. He saw a man tending the fire with a small pot over it. The man was wearing a hood so he could not see the face. Erogen looked at Murda, who merely shrugged and looked back. The man paused for a bit, looking at the fire. Erogen and Murda tensed. Did he hear them? That was impossible, they were as silent as ghosts on their approach. The man merely nodded to himself and reached into his small pack to get out some more meat. He put the meat in the pot and started to stir with a wooden stick. The man sniffed and nodded to himself, satisfied. There's plenty here, strangers. Erogen and Murda held their breaths. He had sensed them. Erogen tensed as he readied his sword. I mean you no harm. I am just a traveler and explorer. Erogen looked back at Murda once more. Murda once again shrugged and sheathed his sword. Erogen followed suit, but he relayed Saphira to be ready just in case. The man turned as watched them approach. Erogen called out, Ho there, my name is Erogen, this is my companion Murda. What business do you have here? The man seemed to smile underneath his hood. I am simple traveler on my way to explore these mountains. I do not care for the ongoings of these lands if that's what you mean. I simply wish to spend my time exploring. Erogen cast a brief look at Murda, who picked up for him. Then would you remove your hood then? The man's smile grew. Of course, where are my manners? The man removed his hood. Erogen and Murda were treated to a very interesting sight. The man had spiky blonde hair, extremely uncommon in Iglesia. He had 3 whisker marks on each cheeks, and his eyes were a deep sea blue that seemed timeless. Erogen nodded. What is your name? The man smiled. My name is Naruto. Then the man moved to pick out 3 bowls and started filling them with soup. He sipped the pot once and nodded, signifying it was ready. He poured the soup into the bowls and laid 2 of them on the ground towards Erogen and Murda. He moved back with his own bowl and sat near the pack. Go on. The man said, smiling as he ate his soup. It has been a while since I've eaten with anyone. Erogen moved forward and brought the bowl to his face. He sniffed it and it smelled very savory. Murda had already taken it and tasted it. It is good. Murda said as he continued to eat, not taking his eyes off the man. Erogen sipped as well. It was good. The meat's fat was melted into the soup, giving it a nice taste, but there were some herbs in it so that the meat's thickness wouldn't overpower the taste buds. Naruto smiled cordially as he kept drinking his soup. What are you doing out here then? The traveler asked as he refilled his bowl. Erogen casted a quick look at Murda, who shook his head. Erogen understood the message and turned back to the man. Thank you for the food, sir, but we cannot tell you. The man shrugged. Of course, everyone has secrets. Now the man paused as he looked towards where Erogen and Murda had just come from. The man stood up and closed his eyes as if in concentration. Erogen pulled his legs closer together, ready to spring into action. Murda also tensed, just in case the man tried to do something. The man opened his eyes and looked at the two, his eyes now had a hardened tint to them. Are you two being chased by an army? Murda and Erogen immediately dropped the bowls and drew their swords and pointed it at the man. Murda growled out at the man. Who are you? No human could possibly hear that far. If the army was that close by then Saphira would have easily heard. Erogen had received no warning, so the Urgel army was still leagues away. The traveler scoffed, then you do not know much about the world boy, come we should leave. These newcomers come in great numbers. The man set to turning extinguishing the fire by tipping over the soup. As he did so, Erogen felt a brush against his mind. He is right. The army is here. How they caught up so fast, I don't know. But we need to get out of here. Saphira told Erogen. The man grabbed his pack and left the soup pot there. He walked towards Murda and Erogen who were still raising their swords. Erogen nodded to Murda, letting him know that the Urgel army was, indeed, on its way. Naruto shook his head, how about this, let us go to wherever you're going with haste. And then we can discuss who I am later. Where it is safe. Naruto looked at the two and watched as the boys started to loosen up and sheath their swords. Naruto nodded in approval. Alright, let's go, please explain to me the situation as we run. Naruto took off with a burst of speed and Murda and Erogen sprinted behind him. As they ran towards the horses, Erogen explained that the Empire was after them for certain reasons they were unable to discuss. Murda scoffed at the certain, but Erogen ignored it. Naruto seemed unfazed that he had just fed two fugitives running from the tyrannical power of the land. Naruto shook his head, you boys got yourselves in a lot of trouble. I assume you are heading towards the Varden. Erogen and Murda looked at the man in shock. What, how did you? Naruto waved his hand, I am a traveler. I know my way around these places. Else, I would not be alive. I have not contacted the Varden directly, but I have come in contact with some of their men. One of them told me the location. I was traveling here to get some info on some personal goals. Murda and Erogen both looked at each other once more. It seemed they were both relying on each other to unravel this man. Erogen then spoke up as he reached Snowfire, who did you meet? Naruto smiled to himself as he looked at Erogen, his name was Braum. The silence came over the group. Murda and Erogen both stared at the man. Naruto noticed this change and then spoke up, is something wrong? Erogen's face fell. Braum died recently. Naruto's eyes widened. What? Murda nodded. He was killed by a wound from the Razak. Naruto cursed under his breath. He had liked Braum. He was a good man. He liked his stories about the history of Aglesia when he first arrived here, he had hoped to meet the man again, but damn it. Naruto looked up and then spoke in a controlled tone, we will discuss this later. For now, follow me. Murda questioned Naruto, do you have a horse? Naruto shook his head, no, but I know a very short route to a passage of Varden. Naruto ran down to the cliff that had an easy path for the horses. Erogen and Murda headed the horses forth. Erogen contacted Saphira to follow them from the sky. Naruto then looked back at Erogen as he was running. Do you feel familiar like Braum? Erogen looked incredulously at Naruto, though his gut was churning at the man's sense. What do you mean? Naruto looked away. You feel like you have a connection somewhere else. I don't know what it is, and it is not my place to find out. Naruto looked forward as he kept running. The passage we are taking is near the river, it is an underground cave that is quite large. Erogen mentally was elated, that meant Saphira could come through. Naruto then called out, be warned, I was told by Braum that we must say something to get their attention. Erogen nodded. He remembered Arya's instructions. We know. Naruto leaped over a rock and nodded to Erogen. Very well. In all this Murda noticed, this man did not seem tired. This was beyond being a good traveler, this was a ridiculous amount of stamina. Naruto then slowed down at a large river that led into a basin of a waterfall. Naruto moved forward towards the waterfall. Normally, Naruto spoke, the main entrance is at the top, but Braum told me there was a side entrance, just in case the main was being attacked. Naruto motioned for Erogen to move forward. Erogen moved forward and called out towards the waterfall, I Varden Aberdu Shurchagaler Godavanta. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Dragon Rider Naruto had learned the magic aspects from Braum. They had been neighbors for a year. In the 4 years he had been in this land, magic language was always fascinating, the way that the words itself had power it astounded him. There was a clanking of the waterfall. 10 men came through or 6 men and 4 dwarves. Naruto immediately felt his danger senses go off. He narrowed into the bald man who was staring at them. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man. This man was not to be trusted. The bald man looked at Erogen, you say you are a dragon rider. Erogen nodded. The bald man then paused, prove it. Erogen smiled as he called down Saphira. Saphira came down soaring in all her glory. Naruto watched as he saw a magnificent beast come down. He was captivated at the elegance yet deadly energy that came off it, a perfect mixture of danger and aesthetics. Erogen called out, "This is proof enough, but we have one more." The bald man snapped, "We do not know if you are an ally of the Varden." Erogen glared at the man, "We have." The bald man called out once more, "Silence, we will decide who." Then a dwarf called out, "Are you blind? That is Arya the egg carrier." Erogen nodded, "She is poisoned, we need to." The bald man seemed irritated, "We cannot." Naruto looked at the elf and then gritted his teeth. "Enough, let us enter already. We can do what you want in there. There is an army bearing down on us." The group paused and looked at Naruto. Naruto sighed heavily and his face started to turn towards irritation, "Urgils from the Empire." The dwarf nodded. "Let us go inside then." The bald man tried to speak up but Saphira already started to move forward. The guards backed clear away from the dragon. Naruto followed suit and Erogen and Murta followed in together. The guards then closed the gates. They had carried the elf away towards the healers and the bald man was now demanding that they be screened. Naruto was at this point ready to stab the bald man and stop his irritating voice from being spoken. The dwarf, Auric, as he proclaimed himself, told that they were fine as they had brought the elf, Arya. Naruto sighed as he watched the bicker go on. The bald man finally called out, "Be ready to be scanned." Naruto sighed once more, "Who will be first then?" Naruto looked at the bald man who motioned towards the rider. The boy nodded as he prepared himself. Naruto watched as the boy face grimaced in pain. Naruto's eyes widened as he looked back at the bald man. Naruto clenched his fists as he moved forward and punched the bald man. Murta watched as the traveler moved forward swiftly before any of the guards react and punched the Erogen's examiner. Erogen, who was quickly discussing with Saphira, felt the pain stopped. Erogen opened his eyes to see Naruto surrounded by swords and the bald man on the floor glaring at Naruto. Naruto looked down at the man, ignoring the swords. "Do you intend to mock spellcasters with your inhumane use?" The bald man stood up and growled out, "What do you mean? Do you intend to say that you are a spellcaster?" Naruto chuckled, "I do not hold the right," but Naruto glared right back at the man. "I know for a fact that you are intentionally hurting the boy. You are trying to make him resist so that you can crush him." There was silence as the soldiers paused and lowered their swords in disbelief. Auric looked at the bald man and yelled, "What? You would intentionally harm the rider?" The bald man scoffed as he tried to wave it off, "The boy would have been fine." Auric glared at the man. "This is not over. The king and Ajahid shall hear of this." The bald man paled quickly and did not speak. Naruto shook his head and he then turned to Auric, "Tell me, are there any other spellcasters here?" Auric nodded, "Yes." Naruto then nodded. "Then, I do not see a problem of us using a different spellcaster. At least to conduct the search." The bald man tried to retort, "They are not as powerful." Naruto rolled his eyes, "But they will not try to destroy the Varden's only hope, now would they?" The bald man shut his mouth. Naruto smirked. I guess I'm right." Auric looked at Naruto with renewed interest. It was not every day someone took the bald man down several pegs. Naruto then continued, "Well, may we leave to a room, we are very tired." "Of course you can guard us." Naruto said cheekily, just asking to be refused. And that was a difficult challenge because saying no to a dragon and its rider was not something you did every day. Auric nodded, "We will provide you what you need, but I ask that you turn over your weapons." Naruto shrugged, "I am a traveler, not much of a warrior." Naruto turned towards the others and they reluctantly unhooked their weapons and handed them over. Naruto nodded to himself, "Good choice." Naruto and the others were now led towards a large room, more like a hall. Naruto had given up his pack but was not worried. The pack only contained food and a couple things to make camp. The things he needed were safely on his person. Naruto sat down on the floor, his back against the wall. He looked amused at Murta and Erogen who were talking quietly in the other side of the room. Naruto could hear them of course, but he made no comment. Naruto turned his attention to the dragon. He was surprised to see it was staring at him as well. Naruto smiled as he stood and approached it. The dragon moved its neck so that it could see Naruto properly. Naruto bowed his head in greeting and he could swear he saw amusement in the dragon's eye. Naruto felt a tug on his consciousness, much like that of the deceased member in his gut. "Hello, my name is Saphira." Naruto smiled as he heard the voice. It was a girl. "My name is Naruto, pleasure to make your acquaintance." The dragon cocked its head slightly, obviously showing curiosity. "You are foreign to these lands." Naruto nodded, "Please keep it a secret though, I do not tell that tale to many people." The dragon merely blinked and continued, "It is your secret to tell. Thank you for showing Erogen and Murta the way to the Varden." Naruto merely smiled as he looked towards the two still talking. "It is nothing. I have done more for other people and I have not once regretted, well, I don't regret most of them." Saphira did not say any more. She knew that the subject was probably private as well. Naruto woke up as he felt someone near the door. It was always his habit, no matter how tired he was he could always sense the sound of clinking metal of blades. Naruto removed his right hand from his forearm. It had gone there automatically. Naruto stood up and stretched as the door was opened. Auric, the bald man and several others walked in. Naruto paused as he saw the men were holding the hilt of their weapons. They still do not trust us yet. Naruto mentally shrugged, it was just a precaution, and Naruto could respect that. The bald man called out, "Wake up, our leader wants to meet with you." Erogen and Murta woke up with a start and got up. Oric walked over holding out their weapons. "Here are your weapons, but be warned, do not draw them." Erogen nodded and took the weapons, passing Murta's sword over. Naruto sighed and called out, "I believe you have searched the contents of my bag." The bald man nodded slowly, it had nothing of consequence. Naruto nodded once more, "May I have it back then?" The bald man nodded slowly and motioned for one of the guards to give it to Naruto. Naruto grabbed the back and put it over his shoulder. He sent a torrent of chakra down the back and felt a returning signal. Good they hadn't touched any of the food supply, or at least they didn't understand what this back really was. The group was now led down several, extremely large hallways. Naruto was already taking in the directions and noting the possible escape routes. Though Erogen and Murta were not companions, they had good hearts, and Naruto could at least help them if they got into trouble. Naruto felt a chill on his back, and he blinked. He wasn't in the hallways anymore. He was in a field. What was he doing in a field? Naruto looked around and then his attention focused on something. Something beautiful. Naruto tried to call out, but his voice would not obey him. The beautiful thing disappeared and Naruto blinked once more. He was back in the hallway. Naruto shook his head. He was doing it again. He thought he had gotten over that, but it seemed the chains would never let him go until he completed his mission. They had arrived in the Varden leader's office. It was a somewhat plush quarters, reminding him almost of the Hokage's tower. Nostalgia took Naruto over as he looked at the many books on the walls. Naruto was now quite amused at this scene. Erogen had entered and Murta had been taken away. It seemed Murta was the son of Morzan, a betrayer of the riders. Naruto had knew about the history of the riders very well, but Murta didn't seem wild, nor evil for that matter, Naruto's gut told him so. And Naruto's gut was usually right. Then, Erogen led to an epic in which he described all the factors of his journey. Finding the egg and so on. Naruto heard Braum's death and was troubled by it. These Razak, he would definitely hunt them, but that was for later. He must focus on the task at hand. Now then, the leader of the Varden spoke up, "Who might you be?" Naruto looked at Aged, "My name is Naruto. I knew Braum about 5 years ago. We were neighbors for about a year." Aged raised an eyebrow, "What do you mean?" Naruto shook his head, "Ika I frikai. Ika we not need hina ono. I am a friend. I will not harm you." Erogen whipped his head towards Erogen as soon as he heard the ancient language. "You know how to speak the language?" Naruto shrugged, "Braum taught me a few phrases here and there. Mostly taught me history though. I had no need for magic, I prefer my own methods." Aged raised an eyebrow, "Since you spoke in the ancient language I will believe you mean no harm. But what do you mean your methods?" Naruto gave a small smile as he leaned back. I was an assassin." Aged clasped his hands forward and leaned his head forward, taking in this information. "It is not every day that an assassin comes to help us. Why should I trust you?" Naruto shrugged. "Give me a chance to prove myself against the coming army. There you will see whether your trust holds." Aged had nodded slowly. "So you help the Varden?" Naruto thought about it for a bit. "Helping them out is fine. I approve of what they are doing. And who knows, maybe I can use them to find my own goals." Naruto looked up at Aged and nodded slowly, "On one condition." Aged nodded, "Name it and we will see. I assume that you will be sending Erogen to the elves." "I want to go with him." Aged face grew still as stone. "I cannot promise." Naruto raised a hand. "Do not worry. I will not cause any havoc, but this also deals with a personal matter. I must contact that person and see how he knew about me." Aged nodded slowly. "Fine. Now then. Oric." Aged called out. Naruto toned out for the rest of the time. In the back of his mind, he was thinking. Thinking of a place where things were not simpler but much more familiar. Naruto chuckled to himself. What was he trying, fool? War is war, all that changes is the enemy. Please review and here we go. When most people wake up from a nightmare they usually scream. They wake up yelling and sit up straight. Their bodies are covered in sweat and they are plagued with what they had just experienced. That was for most people. Not for the assassin that laid in the upper levels of Trondheim. No, the blonde assassin woke up with a startling, slow open of the eyes. He did not breathe fast nor did he shake. He simply stared at the ceiling, not even blinking. After a few seconds, a soft breath escaped the nin. The man sat up slowly and blinked a couple times. "I had that dream again." Naruto squinted as he remembered flashes of it. It was the same nightmare, some variation of it. The man sitting in a chair being stabbed with kunais, a battle filled with blood and littered with dead bodies, and the grave of Naruto, now took a shuddering breath as he shook his head. He had no need for these thoughts right now. Naruto stood up and stretched his body, he scissored his arms back and forth to get some feeling into them. He had placed a small futon on top of the raised bed in the room. It wasn't necessary, but it did add an extra layer of warmth as he doubled up the sheets. The room was barren but clean, as Naruto has assigned some cage bunshin to work on that. In fact, he had made quite a lot of cage bunshin. He had sent the around the layout of the mountain, each of them would dispel when they reached a certain point. Naruto would wince at the pain every now and so, but it wasn't something he hadn't handled before. One of the more frustrating parts about this method was that he had to make an extra cage bunshin to cover the caves underground, which were quite expansive. Though the caves were quite impressive, there were too many of them. Naruto had spent over 20 cage bunshins covering the area under Trondheim. At this rate it would take him weeks before he could understand even a mile out. Though Naruto had to admit that having a confusing and expansive layout was probably the point for the dwarves. Being a nin, one had to respect that. Naruto scratched the back of his head as he reached into his pouch to grab his scrolls. He needed a spare change of clothes. As Naruto walked through the hallways, he couldn't help but notice the emptiness of the stone. And he had to admit to himself, it felt quite relatable. A piece of dry bread was scrunched between his fingers as Naruto continued to walk down. Every so often, Naruto would take a small bite and then keep going. The dry bread was pretty still satisfying though. It reminded him of the dry toast he would have while fighting the Zetsu clones. There were so many of them and they attacked so early, he really didn't even have time for breakfast. So he compromised and ate his toast dry while he killed them. Naruto crunched the bread while he killed the clones. It was difficult multitasking, but he got it done nonetheless. I wonder if there is anywhere I can work out, Naruto thought with some wonder. Erogen walked alongside Auric as they headed towards the training field. Erogen had questioned where he would be tested and Auric simply showed the way. Erogen was restless to say the least. After spending several days in the desert being hunted by monstrous creatures, Erogen had developed the habit of sleeping with his sword clothes. Saphira said it was just a protective response, but Erogen was afraid. What was he becoming? Was he a warrior that would one day lead an uprising, or was he a simple farm boy? Erogen shook himself of his thoughts and let his mind drift somewhere else. What of this Naruto? He had talked to him briefly when they were walking over to Aged. The man seemed very wise and sharp. He also knew Braum. Erogen wondered if he would be able to learn more about Braum from him. But where did this man come from? He said he wasn't from Eglesia, that meant he had to come from a different land across the seas. Was he like the elves? But he looked nothing like Arya. But what made Naruto so strange was his eyes. They looked jagged as if someone took a flawless mirror and smashed it with a hammer. Scarred and old, Naruto's eyes scared Erogen. Or rather, they made Erogen fear him. He had never seen those eyes before. They looked dead. "We are here," Auric announced as his face turned into a bright smile as a large man approached him. The man carried a huge sword that was almost as big as Erogen. "Auric, it's been a while, there is no one left for me to fight with you gone." Auric chuckled. "That's because no one wants to be smacked by that huge sword of yours." Fedric shook his head. "But you can handle it easily enough." Auric waved his hand as his face crinkled in amusement. "That's because I am not as slow as you are an oaf." Fedric's eyebrow twitched and Erogen chuckled inwardly at the banter. Fedric then turned towards him and looked over him. "Dragon Rider and Dragon," Fedric said. Saphira nodded briefly from behind Erogen and Erogen nodded as well. Fedric smiled. "Well, Aja had said we would have to evaluate you, so what weapons do you use?" Erogen shrugged. "My sword and bow." Fedric nodded. "Anything else?" Erogen thought for a moment before coming up with an answer. "My fists." Fedric roared in laughter as he took in the answer. "Good one. Come, let's go into the field." The three entered the field. Erogen cast his eyes around the field, trying to discern the different activites. There was an archer field and several men sparring, though it was divided as their parties of dwarves and humans that didn't mingle. But Erogen's eyes were caught onto something. There was a large group in a circle, and Erogen assumed a spar was going on inside the circle. Erogen pointed it out to Fedric, whose face turned thoughtful. "The newcomer you brought is fighting in there." Erogen raised an eyebrow. "Naruto. But he said he was a traveler." Questioning Fedric, "Is he doing well?" Fedric shook his head as he sighed. "More than well, he is unreal. He took on fighting 2 men at once." Erogen's eyes widened. 2 men at once. Did he win? Fedric nodded. "Yes, and he has been fighting 2 men at once for over 5 hours, and it seems the pairs have to be switched out instead of him. I don't know how many people he has defeated, but it is quite the score." Erogen nodded. "Could we watch?" Fedric nodded. "Of course, Dragon Rider, it's quite the spectacle." The group of 3 approached the crowd. Many noticed Fedric and then Saphira and parted to make way for them. What Erogen saw as the crowd parted was amazing. Naruto had taken off his shirt as sweat was pouring down. Scars of different sizes littered his body over several dense muscles. Naruto was wielding 2 short blades in a reverse grip so that the blades were pointed down. A sword was strapped to his hip, but not in the regular way that most warriors carried their weapon. There were 2 hooks on that attached to his belt. The 2 hooks also attached to either side of the sheath. So the blade would be horizontal to the ground if Naruto stopped moving. But Naruto was moving too fast to be still. The two soldiers must have gotten used to fighting with each other because each of them covered for each other's weak side. But Naruto was far too strong to let them overwhelm him. They tried to hack and stab, but Naruto simply parried and pushed the blades away. Naruto would sometimes add a small kick to the arm, which would push the blade away from its intended target. They were moving incredibly fast and at times Erogen feared that they would kill each other. But Naruto seemed different, he looked like he was playing with them. No, he was teaching them. Naruto would have different stances that showed obvious openings. The pair fighting Naruto would try to exploit it, but Naruto would counter immediately with strange slashes and attacks. The men would try to block it to the best of their ability, but sometimes Naruto's blade went through their guard. And seemingly a coincidence, Naruto would stop short of their skin. At the first few times, Erogen thought that this was just an accident, but it kept repeating, and Erogen started to see the weaknesses in the guards of the men. The pair must have noticed this too and readjusted themselves accordingly. It lasted for only 15 minutes after Erogen had arrived. Naruto slipped under both the men's guard and swung with his arms. A huge blow struck both men on the side of their necks, winding them and effectively disabling them. The men fell to the floor coughing. Naruto looked at the two and nodded. "Very good, I am sure you know what you need to work on." One of the men nodded slowly as he coughed. "Thank you for the spar." Naruto chuckled any time Naruto reached down and helped both the men up. At this point the crowd erupted in cheers. Even Saphira gave a loud bugle of appreciation. Naruto for the first time looked at Erogen. Naruto gave Erogen a brief look over and Erogen felt his breath still. Naruto turned away and looked at Frederick. "Ho, there Frederick. Sorry about the attraction." Frederick shook his head. "That was some excellent blade work there." Naruto nodded at the compliment. "I heard that you were testing Erogen. Could I spar with him then?" Erogen felt his stomach clench. His thoughts raged up like a wildfire in dry woods. "He wants to fight me? But why?" Saphira tried to comfort him. "Don't worry, he probably will just teach you." Erogen nodded slowly. Though his muscles were tense, though his feet seemed like lead, Erogen still stepped forward. Frederick raised an eyebrow. One half was wondering how this blonde warrior had heard that far while fighting, and the other was wondering whether to let Erogen or not. Frederick looked over at Erogen, who looked back. "I see no reason why not to." Erogen replied. Frederick nodded slowly. "Alright then, Dragon Rider." There were whispers amongst the soldiers about the new fight arising. Naruto took a deep breath and lifted up his arms in the air. He stretched and then brought them down slowly. As he did so he called out to the group surrounding them. "Could we have more room please?" Naruto called out to everyone. "I will need to yes, it should work with Erogen." It did with Braum. The Varden spread out in a larger circle and Erogen stepped in the ring. He grasped his sword and drew it carefully. Zarok felt heavy in his hands and the hilt felt slippery for some reason. Naruto eyed him, a playful look adorned his face, but Erogen saw something different in his eyes. Naruto spoke normally, allowing everyone to hear him. "No one stop this fight, please. I will say when it is done. And don't worry, this is not a fight to the death or anything. Just a friendly spar." Everyone nodded in agreement. Naruto let his right leg move back and crouched slightly. His arms spread out, one in front of him and one behind him. "Arrogant," Naruto said quietly. Erogen perked up. "What I am testing is not skill, nor talent." Naruto said carefully. "I am testing determination." Erogen blinked. "Wow." Naruto didn't let him finish as he charged forward. The blade in Naruto's right arm swung downwards in a deadly arc towards Erogen's neck. Erogen blocked it with all his strength. His arms shook as the blades made contact. "He is strong." Erogen thought with fear bubbling in his stomach, like a brewing stew. Erogen tried to push forward, but Naruto's arms seemed to be made out of stone. Erogen felt something jolt his arms and tingling feeling run through his arms to his head. Naruto swung his other blade and Erogen was forced to push off the other blade to block the left one. As Erogen blocked it, not only did he feel that tingling sensation once more, he felt a push come at his stomach. Erogen tumbled backwards. Landing ungracefully on his butt, Erogen used the momentum and rolled backwards. Erogen saw he had been kicked backwards. "Damn it, I didn't even see him move." Erogen got up slowly. The blow hadn't hurt, but it did shake him up. Erogen looked at Naruto and his blood ran cold. The playful face was gone, in its place was a hard and deadly look. The grip on Zarok was ever so tight now. Not wanting to repeat what happened before, Erogen charged in. Erogen swung at Naruto's shoulder. The blonde-haired warrior simply crouched lower, the blade going over him in a clean miss. Naruto, then, proceeded to step forward slightly and punch Erogen in the gut. Erogen flew back, coughing. That blow definitely hurt. Erogen stood up once more and charged again. This time instead of just dodging and countering, Naruto stood like a mountain. Using his blades and the backs of his fists, Naruto parried Erogen's blade. At times he would move the blades downwards and proceeded to punch Erogen in the face. At other times, erogen would overextend and Naruto would move to the side and trip him. This lasted for a minute before erogen was now breathing hard and Naruto was still standing in the same spot. The Varden was now quiet as everyone was watching erogen and Naruto. Erogen stood up, his muscles were burning with exertion and his pride equally burning. Erogen glared at Naruto. He was being toyed with worse. What was Naruto's thinking? To embarrass him in front of everyone? Erogen charged forward swinging his sword in a diagonal manner. Naruto blocked and stood still as his arm shook from the force of the blow. Naruto looked into erogen's furious eyes. Naruto smirked ever so slightly, making erogen growl. Naruto clicked his tongue, "You are becoming angry. Keep your cool. If you strike aim to kill, maiming won't help. Keep your body flowing, do not be stagnant against someone like me." With the last word, Naruto head-butted erogen. Erogen stumbled back clutching his face. Naruto gave him no time of recovery. Naruto stepped forward quickly and brought up his leg. Kicking forward, the heel of the foot crashed into erogen's gut. Winded erogen tumbled back, his vision was now fuzzy and his stomach now felt numb. "Up erogen, we are not finished." Erogen blinked quickly to regain his senses and raised his sword. Suddenly, erogen felt a sudden clarity. It wasn't anything like he had experienced before. He felt every muscle know every cell in his body. He felt he had complete control over his body. But he didn't have time to understand this feeling fully. Erogen felt wind come from his right and instinctively blocked. The Dragon Rider was right on the money as Zarok blocked the short sword. Erogen's vision finally cleared to see Naruto still looking into his eyes. Once again out of instinct, erogen pushed sideways and spun, bringing Zarok around while turning his whole body. Erogen let loose a vicious swing to Naruto's ribcage. Naruto jumped backwards and smiled at erogen. Erogen panted at the exertion. Naruto nodded. Better. Naruto put away the daggers and drew the sword behind him. Holding out in front of him, Naruto pointed his sword in challenge. "Come erogen." Erogen charged to accept the challenge and the two forces clashed in a ring of glory. As the fight progressed, Erogen did not know how long it had been since they first started. Erogen did not know how many shallow cuts he had gotten, Naruto's little hints of where to block. But he did know that he was in searing pain, his muscles were weak and he had yet to cut erogen. There was no one else but Naruto and him. Or at least anyone he could feel, because everyone else was a blur. Erogen struck downwards at the elusive warrior in front of him. The blonde spun away and then struck downwards with his own sword. Naruto's blade smashed Zarok into the ground. Erogen tried to move back to recover his blade, but Naruto was too quick. Naruto reached out with his left hand and back smashed Erogen across the face. Erogen, unconsciously, stumbled back. Naruto went to push kick Erogen again. But Erogen, having felt it numerous times, spun like Naruto. The leg went past Erogen and now Erogen was facing Naruto's back. Erogen struck downwards at Naruto's neck. Naruto weaved to the side and the blade passed centimeters from his skin. Naruto turned his body and elbowed Erogen once again. Erogen rolled backwards as he saw the elbow. The movement backwards absorbed most of the blow, but it still hurt. As Erogen got to his feet, he spat on the side. Blood came out from his ripped gums. He had probably started bleeding from one of those punches he couldn't dodge earlier. The boy right now was running on pure adrenaline and instinct. But what Naruto was doing to Erogen was something on an even more primal level. Naruto showed him a move by demonstrating it on him. Erogen memorized the feel of the move with his body and copied it to the best of his ability. Not that Naruto had ever explained to him what he was actually doing. Erogen raised his sword again, though his muscles screamed in protest. Erogen charged forward once more. Naruto, simply, sidestepped to the side extremely quickly. Instead of tripping him, Naruto lashed out with his right leg and struck Erogen in the gut. Erogen flipped over and landed on his back. Now, Erogen felt the full weight of all his injuries and groaned as he lay on the ground. "Up Erogen, get up." Erogen blinked as he looked at the sky, Zarok still in his hand. "Is this all you got, Erogen?" The persistent voice called at him. "Get up, you are better than this. Or are you a weak child that needs protecting?" Erogen growled though he had barely the strength to do so. Erogen gritted his teeth as he turned his body over and lay on his stomach looking angrily at the man before him. He would be dead before he gave up this fight. Erogen did not know what drove him to go such lengths, but he felt this undying determination. This unwillingness to call it quits even as his body started to groan with pain. Though the wounds on his chest, arms, back and face were hammering at him, Erogen forced his grip on Zarok to tighten. Erogen put his palms on the ground and started to push himself up. That was when Naruto struck again. Naruto had crossed the distance and struck Erogen in the face with his boot. Erogen fell on his back again, his ears ringing and his mouth bleeding. His eyes were watering, but Erogen refused to give in. Erogen turned over and he started to hear voices. "Naruto, that is enough, you are toying with him. Have you no shame? Stop, face me, I will teach you a lesson." There were many shouts amongst the crowd, but none of them stepped forward because they had given their word to not stop the fight. Erogen even heard, through the ringing of his ears, Saphira growling. He also felt the tug on his mind as Saphira tried to call on him. Were they trying to protect him? Was he that useless? No. Erogen gritted his teeth as he roared a cry. The crowd and even Saphira went silent. Erogen turned over on his stomach as quickly as he could and stood up. He gripped his blade in his hand and raised it at Naruto, even as he wobbled on his feet. Naruto looked at him once again in the eyes. What Erogen saw there, as he would later reflect on this scene, was not cold, dead, or anything like that. It was approval. Naruto raised his sword as well. Once more, Erogen. Erogen charged forward, a hoarse yell erupting from his throat. Naruto struck back, their blades clashed together. Though Erogen was willing, though he put every ounce of his strength into the strike, Erogen's body could not hold up. Erogen was pushed back and down onto his knees. But Erogen still kept pushing. Somewhere in his body, he felt something open. It was in the back of his mind, something opened. Erogen felt a rush of energy fill his body and his muscles, somehow soothed. His body, though already listening, was now renewed in strength. Erogen pushed up with this newfound strength, from where he did not know. Naruto's eyes widened as his sword felt new resistance. Naruto relented and allowed Erogen to push upwards, forcing him back. The crowd cheered for Erogen. Erogen roared, his body now full of energy, pushed Naruto back. Naruto backpedaled, but at the same time his mind was a race. So it finally worked. It's slow process, but I finally got that one to open. Ever since they had been fighting, with each strike they clashed or Naruto would punch, Naruto would send a torrent of chakra through Erogen. Naruto had traveled the lands and met many people. But he had come to the conclusion, only people who use magic was able to unlock their chakra cores. These people didn't have chakra cores like the people back home. No, theirs was much weaker, thinner, and would be compared to a small genin. But that did not dissuade the fact that they still had them. Naruto sought to awaken Erogen's core. Normally chakra would be flowing through them already unless one never used them at all, which was the case for the magicians he had encountered. Even Braum had not awakened his, though he did allow Naruto to open it for him. But now, it seemed he had successfully opened the second gate. Erogen stood steady on his feet and glared at Naruto. Naruto just stared stoically back. Maybe I can get one more gate to open before I end this. Naruto then heard the yells around him. But Naruto ducked under a swing and made several quick slashes at Erogen. Erogen parried quickly and tried to counter. Erogen's body might collapse because his chakra cores are too small. I don't even know how long they last either. Naruto looked at Erogen over again. He inwardly winced, maybe he shouldn't have given him that many cuts. Well, time to finish this. Naruto blocked Erogen's strike. Adding chakra to his arms, Naruto pushed forward sending Erogen flying back. Erogen tumbled on the ground but quickly recovered. Naruto didn't let him rest though, Naruto charged forward bringing his sword downwards. Erogen was still in the process of getting up and wouldn't be able to block the strike in time. I'll stop it an inch before his head then, Naruto thought. But he never got the chance. As Naruto's strike sailed downwards, a new blade came and blocked it. Naruto blinked as he looked over to the side and saw raven black hair flowing. What the Naruto blinked twice and turned his eyes back to wielder of the sword, though a rumbling feeling in his stomach was still present. Naruto saw the wielder of his new opponent and found it amusing. Stop, that's enough. Erogen looked at the person who had just saved him and looked at the newcomer. She had flowing black hair, her sword was thin but long. She had pointed ears. She was Arya the elf. Arya, what are you doing here? Erogen questioned, at the surreal savior before him. Arya turned to answer him, but Naruto intervened. Yes, what are you doing here? This is a sanctioned spar. I thought I asked no one to interfere. Naruto's voice was not harsh, but simply calm as if talking about the weather. Arya's eyebrows slanted in an angry V, and her voice held hard steel to it. You are toying with him. There is no point to this continuing. At this Naruto laughed, he laughed very hard. He couldn't help himself. None of them knew what he was doing, though he would be surprised if they did. Naruto shook his head as he lowered his blade. Oh, how ignorance is bliss. Naruto said, sarcastically. Naruto looked away from Arya and turned to Erogen. Erogen, stand, we are done. Erogen blinked and did so. Naruto moved forward, or at least started to. A blade was held at his throat. Naruto raised an eyebrow at Arya, a flash of irritation flickered across his mind. What is it, elf? Arya still glared at him. You've done enough, leave. Naruto rolled his eyes. With a quick movement, Naruto did a quick palm strike towards Arya. What surprised Naruto is that Arya had seen it, or at least something coming. She jumped back and held her blade up. Naruto blinked and then shook his head. Naruto turned back to Erogen who was still staring at him, his eyes a bit unfocused. Oh shit, the gate is closing. Naruto moved forward and then reached into his pouch on his belt. Finding what he needed, Naruto took the item and shoved it into Erogen's mouth. Erogen gagged as he felt something enter his mouth. Eat and swallow it, it'll make you feel better. Naruto quickly spoke. Erogen followed his directions and he immediately did feel better. Before he had suddenly felt all that energy leaving him, he felt like the world was going hazy and was close to fainting. Erogen coughed as energy went back into his limbs. Remember that feeling, Erogen? The dragon rider looked at Naruto quizzically. What do you mean? What? Erogen paused as he remembered what Naruto was talking about. It was that time where he felt a sudden rush in control. It was that time where he felt his body gain sudden strength. Naruto smiled as he saw the flicker of understanding in Erogen's eyes. Good, now then. Naruto turned his eyes away and looked at all the hostile eyes at him, including Saphira's. Naruto sighed. This was the problem with being a foreigner, no one understood you. Looks like I may have to fight my way out of here. Naruto mused. Many of the people there blinked. Erogen openly wondered. What? Naruto turned to him and raised an eyebrow. Erogen spoke slowly. What was that you just said? Naruto blinked once and then realized his mistake. Oh, nothing, just a language. Naruto turned and started to walk away. What was the point of this? Naruto stopped. It was not Erogen who had said it. Naruto turned around and faced the speaker. It was Arya. Yes, elf. Arya still glared at him. What was the point of this? She repeated. Of what? Naruto said, I wonder how long till she snaps. Arya seemed to be losing patience as she gritted her teeth. You make him fight for 4 hours, you cut him up and kick him while on the ground. Then you ask him to get up again and again. Was there any reason to all this disgusting actions? Naruto scoffed at her words. Interesting, it seems none of you know what I was teaching him. There were murmurs and angry glares pointed at him. Naruto sighed as he scratched the back of his head while sheathing his sword. Naruto looked at Erogen who had sheathed his sword and was now trying to heal his own wounds with magic. Erogen breathed softly as he ran his hand over his scratches. As he did so, he heard a voice enter his mind. Little one. Erogen felt a tremor of worry from Saphira. It was reasonable, because as he was fighting he had somehow blocked her out. Yes, Saphira, I'm fine. Erogen said, trying to console her. Don't worry about Naruto, I'll. Erogen's eyes widened as he felt anger rush through like a stream. No. Erogen said determinedly over his connection. Saphira cocked her head to one side. What? He publicly embarrassed you, tortured you. He hit you around like a sack of wheat. He deserves nothing. Erogen understood her protection and was grateful for it, but she did not understand that he taught me. Saphira was now confused. How did Naruto ever teach him? Erogen, sensing her confusion, tried to explain. I don't know how, but it felt like he was guiding my movements. Forcing me to learn. It was like I was on autopilot and Naruto was simply guiding my hand. All I needed to do was provide my determination. Saphira was silent at this. Naruto brought his hand to his chin thoughtfully as he watched Erogen. Well, let's see. How can I describe to, it's difficult for you to understand, so Naruto actually meant this in a non-mocking way. He knew that these people believed in honor fighting a fair fight. He had believed that once upon a time. But now he just killed in the most efficient way possible, unless there was a special case like him. Draw your sword. Arya growled. She pointed her blade at him. Naruto now turned back to her with eyebrows raised. Naruto blinked and shook his head as he grasped his sword. My, did I get you angry? Arya's arm trembled as she gripped her sword tightly. Naruto looked at her stoically. This girl was probably better than Sakura at controlling her temper, maybe all girls couldn't control their temper. That wasn't right because Naruto immediately squashed that thought and focused at the task at hand. He may have to drink himself to sleep tonight, though. Arya charged forward, not even waiting for Naruto to draw his. Erogen cried out to stop Arya. Arya slashed at Naruto's right side. Naruto used his left hand to draw his sword. Spinning on one side, Naruto used the flat of the blade to deflect the swing. Then, he stuck out his leg and Arya tripped over it. To Arya's credit, she jumped gracefully and landed on her feet. Arya turned back at Naruto, her eyes furious. Naruto rolled his eyes, girl's temper, always the same. Arya dove at him, her blade singing in the air. Naruto's own blade met her blade, evenly. They exchanged blow for blow, neither getting any strikes in, or at least for Arya. Naruto added chakra to his arms once more and slashed at Arya. Arya blocked and was pushed back, having to backpedal back. Naruto looked at her and shook his head. You cannot defeat me. Erogen's eyes widened at the statement. He had just seen amazing swordplay, but what made him pause at the statement was Braum's declaration. The weakest elf could beat the strongest human. How was Naruto matching her? Arya darted forward and slashed at his head. Naruto ducked while sheathing his sword. He reached up and grabbed her arms and then turning around Naruto threw her over him. Arya hit the ground, hard. Arya coughed as her back slammed to the ground and a shadow loomed over her. Naruto shook his head while clicking his tongue. pausing to take a look at all the men around and make sure he had their attention. "You can all challenge me if you want," but Naruto raised his arm and brought it down. Everyone's eyes widened in fear and shock. Naruto punched the ground next to Arya. Crunch. The ground cracked with spiderweb marks as the force of Naruto's punch destroyed the solidity of the ground. Everyone took a step back. Naruto stood up and blew the dust off his fist. A smirk adorned his face as Naruto knew that everyone feared him now. "As you can see, I've been holding back." Naruto looked down and saw Arya glaring up at him, still defiant. Naruto held out his hand and attached Charka strings to her. Naruto flicked his hand and she magically was placed on her feet. Arya blinked at what just happened. Naruto didn't make another comment and simply left. The crowd parted in front of him. "Here we go." The blonde-haired nin let the breeze go through his hair as he laid his back against the firm tree. While the fighting was enough to warm him up, it wasn't a workout he wanted. The elf, surprisingly, was quicker than he expected, but not fast enough to give him trouble. She matched the speed of Lee with his weights on. And Naruto had surpassed that speed many years ago, during the war. But overall, these guys sucked. He had seen better fights in the Zetsu clones, and they were all monotonous, no pun intended. Naruto sighed as he shook his head. Maybe if they sucked like this, the army of the king sucked as well. Naruto placed his hand on his chin and sighed. This place needed change. He had seen the poverty and sadness that emanated from the people. The fear they had when they saw soldiers. Even the soldiers themselves feared their superior officers and so on and so forth. What they needed, or what the Varden needed to get the revolution moving, was a small strike force. Naruto closed his eyes. Who would he have on this strike team? Erogen was too important of a figurehead, he had seen how people adored him. Arya also was too important, he had seen her kind before the royal kind. He didn't know what position she had, but for sure she was royalty. Maybe if he could get Gaara, Kakashi and… Wait, what was he doing? Naruto opened his eyes and sat straight up. What was he thinking? Why would he lead a small strike force? Why was he even thinking about helping these people? All he was here to do was kill a person and get out. That was it. Naruto let his head bang against the tree's trunk. But he couldn't help himself. He saw pain and he wanted to help. He saw a tyrant and he wanted to liberate. This was his nature. It was the nature that him. Naruto chalked on his own thoughts and immediately started going over his new jutsu to distract himself. He couldn't think about that. Not now, not ever. Naruto heard breathing over to the side and saw an interesting sight. If he couldn't help directly, he could always help indirectly. Erogen stared at the sky above him. He stared at it and stared at it. Saphira had gone to the dragon hold after being frustrated with Erogen. She didn't understand what Naruto had done for Erogen. When Erogen had tried to explain, try to convey the feeling, it felt like they were looking at separate places. Erogen felt a gap between them, a gap he never wanted to have. But it was there nonetheless. Erogen sighed as he closed his eyes and allowed the sun to bear down on him. He had also just finished talking to Arya. She was very kind to him, if a little bit annoying in her warnings to stay away from Naruto. Like Saphira, he had tried to explain to her what Naruto had done for him. But like Saphira, his words failed to express his feelings. But what had Naruto done for him? Even he didn't know for sure. It was like his body was suddenly alive. He could feel things he never thought he could. He was clumsy at times in his strider work, but now he could control his body flawlessly. It was like he had opened something that made him connected to every single cell in his body. Not only had that, he felt a deep power within him. It was brewing over slowly, like a cup that was overfilled and slowly allowing water to brim over its side. Erogen didn't know where this energy came from, but it felt so mysterious. He could sometimes grasp it like magic, but at other times it would wash through his hands like water. It coursed mainly through his head, but sometimes, like water, it dribbled down to his neck. But for some reason the feeling would be blocked by something, like a stone wall or a dam. The flow would stop and pile up. And finally, after a while, it would recede back to his head. It was a strange feeling, and it occurred too many times for it to be just a normal twinge. Naruto definitely had done something to him. He did not know what, but something inside him awoke. But more than that, he had learned something. He could go farther than anything he thought possible. He was kicked over and over again, but for some reason he just got up. His body was tired then, and he sorely wanted to just let the darkness claim him, but Naruto's voice kept goading him. It was like Naruto wanted him to stand up again, only to be brought down, so that Erogen would have to force himself to get back up. Erogen bit his lips as he thought of Naruto's words. Testing determination. He wanted me to keep getting up. Erogen sighed as he closed his eyes once more. Naruto beat the crap out of him and sliced him up, but for some reason he trusted Naruto to watch his back. Erogen didn't know what attracted him to this man. It was like he exuded trust, or he seemed extremely sincere. Erogen shifted those thoughts away. When he talked with Arya, he had learned quite a couple things. One of them was his future. Ajahid and Arya wanted him to go to the elves to learn more of warfare. Did he have no say in his life? Could he not decide his own course? And what of the Dwarf King, what did he want? But Erogen probably wouldn't find out till much later. Speaking of dwarves, Auric had gone to make a report to Ajahid. It was probably a complaint about Naruto. Was he the only one that saw that Naruto had helped him? Erogen reached up his palm to wipe his face with his hand. Why is my life so complicated? Because you are destined for greatness. Or some crap like that. A new voice came about. Erogen jolted and opened his eyes quickly. He saw Naruto standing over him, smirking at him. Erogen blinked. I didn't even hear me approach. Erogen flushed at being so out of focus that he couldn't even hear someone come by. As if reading his thoughts, Naruto kicked Erogen. Don't worry kid, not many people can hear me when I don't want them. Now what are you sleeping out here for? Erogen stood up as he brushed off his pants. Erogen shrugged and stood tall. I wanted some peace and quiet. Naruto shrugged as well. Fair enough. Sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to know, just in case, what did you feel? Erogen looked at Naruto quizzically. You mean when I fought you? Naruto rolled his eyes. No, the time we drank too much wine and slept with some women. Erogen blushed furiously and grumbled out, of course. Naruto chuckled and slapped Erogen on the back. Don't be too ruffled kid. You're an important figure, you need to be calm and collected or so I am told. Erogen nodded and sighed. I felt a rush in my head. It was like water or something like that. I don't know but it felt like magic but so intangible. That's chakra, Naruto explained. It's energy in all things. Like magic? Erogen asked. Naruto shrugged. Sort of. Let me explain. The sun had now fallen below the mountains and shadows reigned Trondheim. Naruto laughed as Erogen told of his brother at home and how they used to wrestle. Naruto shook his head as Erogen scratched his head in embarrassment. The duo was walking towards Trondheim, or at least the dragon hold. Along the way, Naruto had explained the differences between magic and chakra, as well as the feeling Erogen had. He had even went over most of the large mistakes he had seen in their fight. Also, Naruto wanted to bang the point into Erogen's head that the sword was an extension of the arm. Naruto had to admit, compared to the soldiers he had seen, Erogen had quite the reflexes. Naruto took a small drink from his canteen and allowed Erogen to drink some as well. So you're going up to the dragon hold, huh? Erogen nodded and then his face grew troubled. Erogen gripped the edge of his tunic. It seems that everyone hates you now. Naruto scoffed. Does it matter? They'll work with me if they have to, and I trust they won't stab me in the back. And it wouldn't matter if they tried, I could kill any one of them. Erogen nodded slowly, though he was unsure. The crowd seemed quite angry, including Saphira. Erogen allowed the breeze to go over him. He didn't have bruises, but his muscles were sore from their spar. Naruto closed his canteen as they reached the base of the dragon hold. So, are you going to call Saphira down or what? Erogen nodded. Yes, it would be impractical for me to climb up the stairs. Naruto shrugged. Naruto paused as he looked over and saw a crowd approach him. I'm company and it's not for me either. Erogen looked over to where Naruto was looking at and blinked. Indeed, this crowd did not look like they were here for Naruto. No, their eyes were all on Erogen. Erogen gulped silently as he watched them approach. Naruto gave him a pat on the back and then suddenly Erogen felt a pressure on his head. Don't worry kid. Erogen's eyes widened as he heard the voice. But it wasn't like the normal thought speak he was used to. It felt like the water feeling he had. Erogen grasped at the water with his mind and thought, Naruto, how are you doing this? I'll explain later, first let's get this done, Naruto said, not even looking at Erogen. Erogen looked back at the crowd and saw an old lady approach. Erogen clenched his fist expectantly. The old lady was carrying something in her arms, but she kept looking at Erogen. Her eyes strengthened with determination. Silver hand, please. With that, the old lady opened the blanket in her hands to reveal a baby. Erogen blinked and looked at the baby and then back to the woman. The woman still looked at Erogen. Bless her, Silver hand. I am old and she is an orphan. She had no one left but me. Please bless her. Naruto raised an eyebrow at this. He had seen blessings before, but this was quite interesting to be the one giving the blessings. Well, that was not true, but he was helping the person who was giving the blessings. Erogen, Naruto said over the bastardized form of Inoichi's technique. Repeat after me. Atragulai un alien tothrono on atraono ways gliro frar author. As Erogen imbued the words, the lady bowed her head. Naruto watched as the lady thanked Erogen repeatedly and Erogen only nodded and forced a smile on his face. Naruto smirked as he saw Erogen try to look at him for help but was too afraid of offending or looking annoyed at the woman. After a minute or so, the woman left and Erogen turned to Naruto while shaking his head. Never again. Naruto barked out a laughter. Of course, the first time's the worst. But get used to the attention. People will swarm at you to either praise you or kill you. Erogen blinked and looked at Erogen. A rising fear bubbling from his stomach. What was he becoming? A person who gave blessings, a person who led an army into battle. Wasn't he a simple farmer? You never expect what you become. Naruto stated. Erogen blinked, was he reading his mind? Erogen looked up at Naruto and sighed. I don't know. I don't know if I am ready for this. Naruto nodded. Which makes you ready for it. Because you will be willing to give it your all. And when you are faced with your path, do not fight it, but rather embrace it and make the most of it. Naruto nodded to himself once more. Erogen blinked and then gave a wry smile. Did you think of that yourself? Are you sure you are not a hermit? Naruto blinked at the wording and gave a roaring laugh. He couldn't help it. Erogen looked at him strangely as if Naruto had lost his senses. Naruto saw the look and slowly calmed himself down. Sorry Erogen. What you said was quite nostalgic and amusing to me. Naruto scratched the back of his head. I heard this proverb from one of my deceased teacher and he was considered a hermit. Erogen blinked and then said, I'm sore. Naruto simply stopped Erogen by buffeting him in the head. As Erogen held his head, Naruto rolled his eyes. Don't worry about it kid, I'm not that fragile. Just some things get to me. Naruto smirked at Erogen. Anyways you better call your dragon before more babies show up. Erogen paled slightly and Naruto snickered at his expense. Erogen called out to Saphira. Saphira are you there? Little one, finally it took you ages to come back. Did you walk to Naruto and back and somehow got lost at Jerda? Erogen chuckled at her jibs and continued. No, come down. I need to get up. Oh alright and I was having a nice sleep too. Erogen could feel the playfulness over her voice. Erogen shook his head as he looked at Naruto who was digging through his pouch. I know I put it ha Naruto called out triumphantly. He pulled out a dagger, but it was a strange dagger. It had a ring at the end of the hilt like the other daggers Naruto had used against him. The blade also had two smaller prongs extruding from the connection between the hilt and the blade. And what made it extremely peculiar was the writing on the blade. Erogen couldn't read it and it didn't look anything like he had seen before. Naruto tapped the blade twice on his fingers before flipping it and handing it to Erogen. Erogen looked at it and grasped it. He stared at it for a moment before looking up at Naruto. What is this? Naruto smirked. A little something special. Think of it like a good luck charm. Erogen looked at the writing once again. Is it ceremonial? Naruto waved his hand and shook his head. No. Naruto placed a rough hand on Erogen's shoulder. I want you to keep this with you. Naruto's tone was solid and very serious. The two warriors locked eyes and Erogen came to an understanding of how important this dagger was. If you are in danger and you need help, throw the knife at the opponent. Trust me on this. It will help you. Erogen nodded slowly. Alright, I promise. Naruto moved back, somehow satisfied with the promise. Good then. Off I trot then. Naruto moved happily towards the main buildings, whistling some kind of tune that Erogen couldn't match. The next day was a blur for Erogen. Very first thing in the morning, he was awoken by Org. He was then taken down to be tested by Arya in magic. And while he did everything he could, it felt like he was so incompetent when she asked several things, numerous things that he had not even heard of. What happened to all his training with Braum? If she knew more than he did, how could he ever fight Galbatorix? After he had finished testing his incompetence, Erogen had run towards the kitchen. He ate well and so did Saphira. There he was visited by TenchiSaWaDa. She was a pretty girl whose skin amazed him. She held a royal air like Arya. She told him the directions to Murta's cell. After she left, Erogen raced towards the cell and discussed with Murta about Arya, TenchiSaWaDa and more importantly Naruto. Finally, near the end of the day he traveled through the halls and found Solibum. The werecat was here and he followed the cat to an interesting sight. Are you going to stand there gawking like a mentally retarded baboon or come in like civilized man? Angela called at him as she was drinking her tea. But Angela wasn't looking at him, but rather at what was in front of her. Yay, kid hurry up, the tea is getting cold. And it's pretty good too. Naruto finished as he looked down at the board. Erogen moved forward carefully looking between the two extremely mysterious people. What are you doing here? Erogen called out. Naruto picked up a piece on the board and moved it carefully. Who? Erogen shrugged. Did it really matter who answered? Angela rolled her eyes. I heard you were a dragon rider from this. Angela motioned towards Naruto. Traveler. I knew you were special but not that special. Angela touched her lips thoughtfully. I suppose that's why Braum took you under his wing. Erogen felt his stomach squelch as he heard Braum's name. Well you predicted his death so, I guess. Calm down kid, Naruto spoke quietly. Erogen jolted and looked at Naruto and then flushed with embarrassment. He was right, Erogen had lost his temper then. Angela, realizing her tongue was off, started to apologize. I'm sorry Erogen, I didn't mean to be. Her voice trailed off not knowing what to say. Erogen shrugged. It's alright. He chose to protect me. That is what matters. Naruto nodded as if agreeing with Erogen. Naruto bit his lip. This is like playing with Shikamaru. Shikamaru? Erogen asked. Naruto waved his hand. A friend from my homeland. Oh, Erogen said quietly, where exactly are you from? Naruto paused as he clasped his hands together and gave Erogen a sharp look. I come from a different land. West of here. Very very far from here. Across the seas to be exact. Erogen eyes widened. That was why he was so different. Dozens of questions appeared in his head and he was about to blurt one out when Naruto reached up and flicked Erogen in the head. Erogen stepped back and held his head and rubbed it slightly. Naruto rolled his eyes. Learn some restraint, kid. I won't tell you yet. You have to have some patience. Erogen lowered his hands and his shoulders in a bit of disappointment. But Erogen knew that Naruto didn't want to talk about it for now. Erogen bit his lips and asked. Could you at least tell me what your lands are called? Naruto looked at him with an annoyed expression and Angela sat back and laughed. Erogen reached and scratched his head as he waited for a response. Naruto shook his head. Geez, well, it's called the elemental continent. But my homeland is called Konoha, translated similar to leaf in your language. Erogen let the name go of his tongue. Konoha, why is it called? Naruto flicked Erogen in the head again. Geez, what did I tell you about patience? Erogen had the dignity to look embarrassed. Naruto instead of glaring gave him a small amused smile. Come on kid. Naruto turned back to the board and sighed. I lost again for the third time in a row. Angela smiled and started to clean up the pieces. Looks like I got the hang of this game. Naruto rolled his eyes. And I only taught you this morning, damn it, freaking geniuses. Angela gave him a bland look and Naruto raised an eyebrow. What? Angela huffed. There is no such thing as being a genius, there is only being insightful or being dull as a brick. Naruto shrugged and with a sigh, he watched Erogen talk to Angela. He decided then, he would help Erogen with his little king problem. Here we go. Naruto woke up, his body paralyzed once more. Naruto blinked slowly, allowing the tense and rigid muscles to relax slowly. But this did not stop the beating of his heart from palpating rapidly. Nor did this stop the mind from plaguing his thoughts. Naruto finally loosened his body and turned over. He let his legs swing out and over the bed and sat up. He took a deep breath and looked around the room. He spotted a porcelain bottle next to his bed. So that was what caused the nightmare, Naruto chuckled hoarsely to himself. Naruto reached over and grabbed the bottle, swigging it. He let the sake burn his throat and fall deeply into his belly. He shouldn't be doing this but it didn't matter because he was here and Naruto took another drink. He didn't want to have those thoughts right now. Naruto closed his eyes and allowed the cold liquor to fill his throat and burn it to hell. But now that he thought about it, he was going to hell anyways. Naruto looked around his room, it was bare with the necessitates. A desk for work, a chair to go with it. There was a wash bin on the side. The bed was nice and comfy. Sure, there were a couple cobwebs and patches of dust around the area, but Naruto didn't mind. He had slept in worse places than this. Naruto got up and walked to the edge of the room where he had laid his clothes down. Naruto picked them up and dusted them off. He put the clothes slowly on, the fabric stretching over his boats and scars. Naruto idly wondered how many scars he had gotten during the war. Not including the ones he had gotten from. Naruto gritted his teeth as a flash of anger passed through his head. He really didn't want any of these fucking thoughts right now. Naruto put his clothes quickly and reached for the sword he had gotten from Frederick. Naruto paused as he looked at the sword. It wasn't his weapon of choice, no, his weapon was from the Wind Temple. At first he wanted to know how a sword worked. But since he had decided to help Erogen with the king, Naruto decided he would use the sword to train Erogen. Of course he was no expert, but he could give Erogen a tough time well in fighting at least. The boy had some good instincts though, adapted very quickly to the things he had shown him during the fight. Naruto sighed as he scratched his head. He had calmed down quite a bit. This was good, something was distracting him. It would help keep him from getting bored. It would help keep him from losing his sanity. Naruto grabbed the blade and strapped it to his back. The guard of the sword hit and bounced unceremoniously on his thighs as he walked outwards. Naruto walked through the hallways towards the lower levels. It was cold in the hallways, it was cold everywhere. Naruto walked towards the stairs so he could start climbing down. Naruto walked down the steps, his mind not really focused on his task at hand. Maybe I could start off with some speed work. Naruto thought to himself. He had seen what Arya, spelled it right this time folks, could do with her speed. It was faster, much faster than he had anticipated. Of course it was child's play to even keep up with it, hell he could have fought her with one hand and not move a single step. But what was frustrating was that Erogen was even slower than her. Waits. No, they wear samurai-like armor, it would just get in his way. Gravity seals, I would have to have it something like 1.3 times to not really kill him. He isn't a nin, so he can't use chakra to help his muscles. Maybe magic could. No, shouldn't make assumptions based assumptions. I do not know the limitations of magic so I shouldn't delve into it. Naruto bit his lip as he continued to glide down the steps. From there, we could always make a unique fighting style. He needed to start using his hands and feet more. The warriors around him were pathetic. By Naruto's standard they were worth genin, hell they might as well be academy students. They relied solely on their swords and didn't bother to use their fists or hands as a tool. But probably that's because they aren't that strong. The stronger you were, the less you relied on weapons. And at a certain point, when you don't even need a weapon, you can bring out the weapon's full potential. Their strikes were weak and speed was horrible. They had discipline, though, but only to a certain extent. It was frustrating to think that this was what they were using to fight a country that controlled most of the lands in this place. And how was Erogen supposed to overcome this? He could always take him away and teach him, but that wouldn't work. Naruto blinked as he remembered what Braum had told him about the deal between the elves and Varden. The elves would train the rider. Naruto had also heard about the elves, Braum had told him about them. Warriors of strength and power. They were like nobility but were extremely logical. What made this situation ludicrous but also curious was that the elves were not helping the Varden and dwarves. How was this supposed to work? Were the elves hanging back to see who win? That wasn't right, Braum had told him that the elves were waiting for the dragon rider. So if Erogen was the rider, he had to go to the elves. This would work in two ways. One way was that Erogen would learn the rider ways while persuading the elves to join the front. The second way was to find the person who had contacted him. It was magic for sure, the feeling when Braum had first touched his mind all those years ago felt similar. Naruto had finally reached the bottom of the steps and walked towards the mess hall. As he walked through he got stares or hostile glances. It seemed that many knew of his endeavors against their savior and the elf. Naruto scoffed mentally, they knew nothing and they were nothing. Naruto paused and shook his head, he shouldn't like that. This was not how he thought. Everyone was worth something. A tinge of guilt passed through Naruto's stomach, was he becoming this cynical? This destructive? Naruto took a deep breath and sighed. He would have to work on controlling these emotions, maybe some meditation was in order. Naruto walked into the mess hall and went to the back. He grabbed a tray and helped himself to the food behind the dwarfs' backs. They couldn't sense him cause he moved in their blind sights. Useless usage of skill, but still it allowed him to avoid attention. Naruto ate his food silently in the corner not wanting to attract attention. He watched the people carefully, taking note of their faces and what weapon they carried. It wasn't out of conscious thought but rather habit. Naruto sipped his bread into his soup and bit it, chewing slowly allowing the thick soup to fill his taste buds. Naruto sighed. I wonder how my clone is doing. He had sent several clones throughout the Trondheim. They were to dispel every few intervals, even at night. Naruto had long gotten used to the mental fatigue and the chakra from his dead tenant had long since helped him increase his capacity. Naruto took another bite and felt a tingle. Speak of the devil, Naruto thought as he felt memories of his clones pass through him. Naruto paused. This was his super clone's memories. Page Bunshin was a very high-level technique but very fragile. One hit on a clone would make it disappear, something that made it very frustrating for Naruto. So what Naruto did was create a new clone, a supercharged clone which had enough chakra to handle about 30 hits give or take a few jutsus. He had sent one of them down to check deep into the underground caves. What the hell, Urgels? Naruto thought. Quickly downing his food, the blonde traveler walked immediately toward Ajahid's office. He reviewed mentally what he had just learned. A large army will probably be here in about 2 days. From what I gathered from my clones in the library, it would be impractical to run from Trondheim. They would have to defend then. Naruto walked past several guard who recognized him, while they did tense up they did nothing to stop him. It seemed that Ajahid had told them to back off. Naruto didn't pay that train of thought much heed as he entered through the doorway and saw Ajahid looking over several scrolls. Ajahid looked up and sat back, crossing his arms. Naruto. What is it? The nin detected an aggravated tone in his voice. Naruto sighed, I'm guessing from your tone you disagree with what I did to Erogen. And Arya. Naruto blinked. What, I didn't even hurt her. Ajahid leaned forward, his eyes glaring at him, his dark skin, which reminded Naruto of B, your actions may have lowered the morale. Naruto scoffed, Erogen can only grow stronger, that's all. Ajahid opened his mouth to continue this argument, but Naruto cut him off as this was not the time for this conversation. Urgels are coming, in about 2 days' time. Ajahid closed his mouth and carefully sat back, staring at Naruto. Ajahid regarded Naruto carefully, trying to discern if he was lying. Naruto did not do anything as he took the scrutiny with full force. Ajahid sighed, how do you know? Naruto placed his hands together and poof. Ajahid blinked as he saw another clone pop up next to Naruto. Ajahid stood up, his hand automatically going to his sword. How? Naruto sighed as he waved his hands, I am not from your lands, remember? Ajahid looked at the clone and back to Naruto and sat down. Alright, so you used that to detect the Urgels. Where are they coming from? The tunnels underneath here. Ajahid nodded. I will call for immediate meeting of the leaders. We will prepare. Naruto shrugged, I will have to request something as well. Ajahid raised an eyebrow. What is it? Naruto scratched his head, when the time comes, Naruto's eyes flickered upwards. I will tell you, but not now. Right now it is not important for your survival and will only muddle your thoughts. Ajahid looked at Naruto and clasped his hands in front of him. Will this hamper the Varden? Naruto smirked, his fangs glinting in the candlelight. Of course not. This is something personal. As soon as Erogen entered the room, he knew something was wrong. He had just finished his meal when a messenger had come, dragging Oric and him to this room. Oric and him had come to an understanding about Naruto during this time. Oric understood that Naruto was not torturing Erogen unjustly. Rather, Oric understood how Naruto was testing his determination. Saphira had only accepted Naruto's doings when Erogen sent the relevant memories. But both Oric and Saphira disagreed that Naruto had done it the right way. Erogen couldn't convince them, but for some reason he knew that Naruto's method was the only way. Erogen passed these thoughts off for another time as he looked between the leaders of the Varden, dwarves, and the elf. They all looked at the map on the table, which seemed like multiple pathways. What is going on? Erogen asked as he looked at the people around him. Ajahid jaw clenched as he looked at Erogen and to everyone in the room. The Urgels are coming here in a day's time. We have received confirmation from a dwarf he came running from the tunnels. Ajahid pointed at black dot on the map. This is where he said he came from. Erogen blinked as the conversation went through his head. This was the tunnels. Erogen's eyes narrowed. Urgels were coming, the Empire. Erogen gripped his sword, which was attached to his belt. We will have them evacuate over here. Ajahid finished explaining to his second-in-command. Ajahid then pointed to 3 tunnels and circled them with his fingers. We will funnel them into these areas so that we don't fight them all at once. Which means that we have to close off these tunnels. Ajahid circled 4 tunnels. Ajahid looked up to Erogen and Arya. This is your job. You'll be working with the dwarves to break them down. Erogen nodded slowly. The voice came from the shadows. Is there a fallout plan in case of being overrun? The warriors around the table turned towards the back, behind Erogen. They saw a mess of blonde hair, hunched over near the wall. Arya glared. You. Naruto looked up and smirked. Naruto moved forward and looked at Ajahid. So, is there a fallout plan? Ajahid nodded slowly. In case we get overrun, the archers will provide a cover blanket so that the rest of us can retreat into the city. From there we will hold the main gate. Ajahid pointed out again. Naruto nodded. Maybe I could use explosive tags, I'm pretty sure I can make some. Naruto paused as he heard Erogen's question. Why can't we break all the tunnels down? Oric explained. And Naruto cursed under his breath. Tags are out, that means Naruto mentally sighed. It seems he would have to get up close and personal. Naruto scratched his head. Who is their commander? Ajahid looked up, his face grave. A shade named Durza. Naruto blinked. Brahm had told him of shades. They were said to be immortal unless stabbed through the heart. Naruto thought this was funny as he had been stabbed everywhere including his head and he still survived. Well, not everywhere, he had made sure no one had stabbed his reproductive organ. Naruto rolled his neck around, cracking the joints. So how many do we have, in numbers I mean? Ajahid looked away from the dwarf king, Hrothgar, if Naruto remembered correctly. Around 10,000 strong. Naruto nodded. That was good, not too large, so that the soldiers can hide behind each other, and not small enough to be overrun easily. How do you plan to split it up? Ajahid answered without missing a beat. 3,000 each entrance and 1,000 for reactionary force. Naruto tapped his lips. If he was going to get up and personal, he might as well go all the way. I'll take one of the entrances, split the army 4,500 each, and still have 1,000 for reactionary. Ajahid raised an eyebrow, and the room went silent. Erogen stared wide-eyed at Naruto. Why, you're going to take an entrance by yourself? Ajahid sighed. We cannot seal the entrance. I didn't say that. I said I would take one of the entrances, which means I will be fighting on my own. Ajahid blinked and crossed his arms, thinking. Are you going to use what you showed me in my office? Naruto scoffed. If that was my only technique I would not be alive, besides that is one of my more basic techniques. At least to me, Naruto thought with bitter amusement. Do not worry, nothing will get past me. I am more worried about you not having enough men to cover each entrance. The dwarf king spoke up. Are you saying we are incompetent? Naruto eyed him carefully. I am saying it would be more effective to let someone like me ease your troubles. Erogen's eyes narrowed. What was Naruto thinking? Was he this mad? Had he lost his senses? No one can take on army by himself, let alone an army of Urgels. Even Erogen wasn't daft enough to know he couldn't fight an army. But he sounded so confident, as if he had done it before. Had he? Ajahid shook his head. You sound overconfident. You may be a warrior, but no man can take on an army. Naruto scoffed once more and let out a small chuckle. My country, I've seen one man take on countries, and I have burned villages your equivalent to cities, to the ground, single-handedly. Hrothgar spoke up. Any proof to your claim? Naruto raised an eyebrow and placed his hands together. A series of poofs arose and suddenly smoke appeared everywhere. Erogen blinked and waved his hands around to clear the smoke. Erogen looked around and his eyes went wide and his hand went to his weapon, as did all occupants to the room except for Ajahid. The room was suddenly filled with plops of blonde hair. Erogen scanned his eyes around, his mind buzzing with questions. How? Was the only thing Erogen could say. The Naruto that still had his hands together chuckled at Erogen's shock and at all of the occupants' shocks. Like I said, this is one of my basic techniques. I can create my own army if I wanted to. Naruto waved his hand once and another series of poofs ensued, along with some smoke, but it was less this time. The room had settled somewhat from the surprise. The occupants still stared warily at Naruto. The idea of a soldier wielding more power than the ruler, that was always troublesome. Naruto turned towards Ajahid once more. Now, I can create about somewhere around 5,000 without hampering myself far too much, but I wouldn't even need that many. Rogzer took his hand off his hammer and looked at Ajahid. He is strange, where did you find him again? Naruto mentally smirked. Rogzer was trying to play this off. But Naruto, with his heightened senses, could smell the sweat on the back of these people's necks and the tightening grips around weapons or fists. Ajahid shook his head. I didn't. Brahm did. Ajahid has shifted his weight towards his right foot. Unconsciously or not, it was positioned so that he could jump back, away from Naruto. Rogzer nodded as if it explained everything. Alright then, human you can. Naruto eyed the rest of the occupants, they were all shying away from him. Quite interesting really. But only one person actually didn't move away, it was the elf. She had simply stayed where she was and had her hand on her sword, probably ready to gut him if he showed any signs of attacking them. This fear was common though, many feared what they could not understand and fear often led to stupid decisions. Naruto removed himself from these thoughts to correct the dwarf. Please don't call me a human. Naruto cut the old dwarf off. The dwarf king raised an eyebrow. Then what are you then? Naruto smiled, his fangs appearing, he looked for more menacing now as his eyes narrowed. I am a demon. Erogen explained everything to Saphira and had finished closing down the tunnels. Erogen let out a sigh as he let the air hit his face, drying and cooling his sweat. His back rested against Saphira, her warmth still radiated into his body. Erogen wondered what would happen now. No, he knew what was going to happen. War or battle was going to happen. After the meeting, before Naruto ran off somewhere, Naruto had told him very specifically to keep safe and be quick. Naruto said that all the fights he had been through were nothing compared to a full-scale battle. People will die around him and it will seem helpless, but the more he killed, the less enemies there will be to kill your comrades. Simple logic, but it was something Erogen needed to remember. Something he needed to drive him to slash the heads of the Urgils and call quickly. But he couldn't help but shiver. The way Naruto had said it was like he had done this all his life. Could he? He said he was an assassin, but did that mean he fought in a war? If so, what was his country fighting over? And how did he get here? Erogen continued on these lines for a long time, while resting. Erogen sighed as he looked around. Saphira had finished garnering her armor from Hrothgar. Erogen was very thankful to the Dwarf King, and Auric was now in the process of sharpening his sword. Many of the soldiers were. They all held grim faces. Their eyes flickering towards the cave entrances and back to their weapons. Archers were strung their bows, checked the tips of their arrows. Many tightened armor constantly or even drank out of a wine skin. Erogen was also nervous, he felt the bubbles in his stomach rise. His hands weren't shaking, but his heart fluttered. Erogen blinked as he looked in the distance. He saw a familiar figure. Erogen stood up and walked over. Arya? What are you doing here? Erogen asked, confusion and worry dripping from his voice. Arya looked at him, her eyes were hard, not in a bad way, but they held a certain steel. Arya sighed. It is my writ to be here, I must repay my debt. Erogen blinked. Arya, fighting. But your wounds, they probably haven't healed yet. Arya shook her head, do not pamper me. I will fight. It is my place to be here. Erogen opened his mouth to continue arguing, in hopes of convincing Arya. A voice cracked in like a wedge hammered down. Now Erogen. If she wants to slay some people, let her do so. Erogen turned and saw Naruto approaching them, a joyful smile on his face. Naruto was not wearing any armor at all. Instead he wore a green vest and dark blue pants. He also had a white coat that had something akin to flames on it. It looked extremely fancy, not what you would wear to a battle. Naruto also carried a scroll in his hand, but Erogen paid that no mind. He didn't see any swords on Naruto. The only visible weapon was the copy of the dagger that Naruto had given to Erogen. But this dagger was on a necklace that was around Naruto's neck. Also on the necklace was a gem of some sort, but Erogen also paid that no heed. It contrasted so much with the other people surrounding them. Arya's glare turned dark as she looked at Naruto. Naruto ignored Arya for the time being. Erogen looked between the two and took an unconscious step back. Naruto smiled as he scratched the back of his head. Nervous kid. Erogen blinked and clenched his fists. He couldn't be nervous, he was a rider. He had to lead, set an example. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Well, he's trying to hold it in. What are you doing here, human? Arya growled out. Naruto turned to her, his eyes now narrowed, the smile now gone and was replaced with a thin line. Naruto spoke slowly, I am a demon, nothing more, nothing less. Now elf. I am here to talk to Erogen. Arya gave one last glare and turned on her heel. She walked swiftly away. Erogen blinked and sighed, he was somewhat sad to see her go. But in hindsight, it was probably better because Arya might have attempted to kill Naruto. Erogen turned back to Naruto and waited expectantly. Naruto smirked at the kid. You are with this cave, correct? Naruto motioned with his head towards the cave on the furthermost right side. Erogen nodded. Yes, Erogen paused. A question built in his mind. But are you really going to take on the army by yourself? Erogen tried to calm his voice, but he still had an exasperated tone. Naruto scoffed. Kid, I just said I would. Erogen countered. With only a dagger. Naruto sighed and shook his head. No, not just a dagger, I will fight with my weapon of choice. Now, let me tell you something. Naruto raised a hand and pointed at Erogen's forehead. Like I said before, be quick, kill lots and you'll do fine. But if things get too dicey, back out immediately. Don't be stupid. With that, Naruto turned and left before Erogen could continue this conversation. Naruto didn't get that far though, Aja had stopped him. Naruto. Naruto turned and saw Ajahid. Ah, there you are, I was going to ask which cave you had assigned me. Ajahid pointed towards the middle cave. That one. I have set up a fallout force of 2,000 to back you up if you fall. Won't be necessary. I know my abilities. They won't get past me. Ajahid paused and gave a hard look at Naruto. Naruto now smiled and held the gaze. I wonder though, Naruto thought. Should I give him a dagger? Ajahid continued. You will explain everything to me afterward. Naruto shrugged. Why not? Naruto spotted something interesting that was moving towards Erogen. Ajahid stalked off to lead his army on his battlefront. Naruto moved towards the thing that caught his interest. Murgath was it. The son of Morzin turned towards Naruto in surprise. Naruto. Naruto smiled. Well then, I see Ajahid released you. Murgath nodded slowly. He had heard from Erogen what Naruto had done and Murgath knew to be wary of him. And you defeated an elf. Naruto shrugged. It was simple. But on the other hand, Naruto tossed Murgath a Hirshin dagger. Murgath caught and turned over his hand so he could see it glinting in his palm. Naruto scratched his head, that's for you, throw it if you're ever in trouble. Murgath nodded towards Naruto. Thanks. Though Naruto accepted the gratitude, he could feel the uneasiness, no the doubt in Murgath's voice. Either way, Naruto smirked. Welcome kid. Sigh, he doesn't believe me, oh well. It didn't matter for Naruto. Well sort of, he hated seeing good kids die. Naruto sighed as he walked to his tunnel. As he walked, many looked at him strangely, some even glared at him. But he could feel it, that familiar feeling of fear. It was surprising to an extent. He felt it as a kid and didn't understand it. But he felt it in this place and understood it. Ironic really, because he was now accepted in his home country. Hell, they even tried to make him head of the Supreme Council. Naruto declined of course as he had found something better. And now, Naruto closed his eyes and he let his hand drift towards his scroll. He grasped the scroll and pulled it out. He now stood in front of the cave. His breath was showing in the cool midnight air. He would start early, no need to wait. The more he killed, the more warmed up he'll be in case someone big came. He didn't have to worry about chakra, he had an unlimited amount, or at least close to it. It was actually the reason why he was able to fight Madara for about a week straight. And Madara finally died of chakra exhaustion, since Naruto's seals prevented him from escaping, oh the wonders of Hirshin. Unlike his father, Hirshin was not his main focus. Naruto unraveled the scroll, a complex seal laid within the writing portion. Naruto laid it on the ground and smiled as he looked at the inscription. It was used to contain his weapon. The weapon he had received after training in the Wind Temple. Naruto placed his hand on the weapon and allowed chakra to flow into the scroll. A small poof was heard and Naruto looked through the smoke. Ah, there it was, his old friends. Naruto grasped the bars of the Wind Hollow Tonfa and spun the once to get the feeling back. The Tonfa were really simple, as the Wind Monks were more for practicality than aesthetics. It was silver all around and the Tonfa base was actually hollow in between. Naruto was skeptical, calling it a pipe with a handle, but his instructor had beat his ass with one swing. When Naruto had finally surpassed his instructor, he received the Wind Hollow Tonfas. Naruto spun the Tonfa and hooked them on the back of his belt. He had removed the sword sheath and replaced it with what it was intended for, the Tonfa sheath. Naruto closed his eyes and whispered a prayer as he was taught by the Wind Monks, may the wind glide your soul to peace. May my blade be quick so that you feel no pain. After he went to the Wind Monks, he said this for every opponent he met. Even Madara had heard the same mantra. But Naruto would not say this for one person. That person would die very slowly. Naruto reached into his gut and felt the chakra he had stored away for so long. Naruto cracked the barrier, grasped the nostalgic liquid and opened his eyes. Erogen watched as Naruto put on the strange weapons. It looked like a metal stick with a handle. Naruto had closed his eyes and whispered something. And then when Naruto opened his eyes, a huge wave of energy erupted. Erogen leaned back and shaded his eyes. A bright light engulfed the Varden as Naruto was now glowing. As quickly as the blue and white light had come, it went away. Erogen blinked out the stars in his vision and looked at Naruto, who drew his tonfa. Naruto smirked and looked at the tunnel. "Okay." Naruto yelled. Everyone in the Varden had stopped to watch. Naruto cracked his neck and crouched slightly. "Let's go." Naruto took a step forward and suddenly disappeared. A huge echo that sounded like a pop erupted. And the ground where Naruto had stood cracked, following a huge gust of wind. Erogen felt his gut flip. He had fought someone with that speed. And it was only a couple seconds later did he say that Naruto was crazy. Oric agreed with him. It didn't take long for Naruto to find the Urgels, from their big smelly skin and their hulking masses. Naruto's senses easily picked them up. The Urgels were actually surprised in seeing someone charge at them. The lead one who had some kind of jewelry on his horns, laughed at him and took out his axe. Naruto relaxed his grip on his tonfa and allowed his body to move for him. The lead Urgel slashed as Naruto approached. It was then that Naruto allowed chakra to push into his feet, making him move at speeds beyond any normal human. The Urgels froze. Any nervous system has a limit before it freezes, trying to process what happened. When the nervous system is hit with a certain amount shock that is unrelatable to previous encounters, the nervous system freezes. This is why many people, who are stabbed from behind, freeze up. With these new feelings, the nervous system tries to understand what happens. The Urgel's nervous system was no different. Naruto had moved at such blinding speeds that the receptors in the Urgel's eyes, who could not boost their reception capacity with chakra, froze up. Well, this was one of the reasons why they froze up. The other reason was that their bodies now had countless cuts on them. The air under the tunnel and laid still. Even if there was no direct wind, the movement of thousands of troops certainly caused a draft. But the air was still right now. Many of the Urgels behind looked ahead and saw that the front had suddenly stopped. One of the Urgels roared, in hopes of getting the Urgels in front to move. As the Urgel finished yelling though, a disturbing scene appeared. All the Urgels in the front lines fell down, their bodies spilled blood on the floor. The Urgels took an unconscious step back. They didn't know what happened, they were too far behind from the scouting party that moved on ahead. There wasn't anyone near the dead bodies of their kin. But then the herded. The Urgels looked up and saw a small human drop to the floor. The Urgels brandished their weapons and roared. Naruto looked at them, his eyes sharp but bored. "You know, I didn't really have high expectations for this fight." Naruto took a stance, shifting his right leg to the back. He turned his front foot so that it was pointing towards the rightmost Urgel. He used his left tonfa to point at the Urgel in the center. And finally he spun his right tonfa, getting ready to use the wind chakra. Naruto leaned forward, preparing to spring. "This won't even give me a workout." Naruto roared and dashed forward. Erogen looked at the battle below. He had barely been saved by Angela and berated himself for being foolish as Saphira flew above. Erogen looked at the scene below. It wasn't pretty. Since the time Naruto went in, till now, not a single Urgel had gone through the tunnel. Whatever Naruto was doing, it was damn effective. On the other hand, the two tunnels left were pouring out Urgels. Ajahid and Hrothgar were using their soldiers to great effect. And because the center tunnel was being held by Naruto, the Varden could use it as a flanking point. But even so, the Varden and dwarves would not last long if this fight continued. While they were doing well, the Urgel numbers seemed endless. Murgath was with Ajahid fighting side by side. Both were on horseback. Arya was fighting near Hrothgar, she had no horse, but moved faster than any man and Urgel. Erogen looked over the battlefield to see which would need the most aid until he felt a consciousness enter his mind. There are loud noises under Trondheim. It sounds like Urgels are trying to dig into the city. Erogen flew Saphira down towards Arya. "Get on." Erogen shouted. Arya jumped up and landed on Saphira's back gracefully. Saphira snapped at an approaching Urgel towards the right. But sadly, her left flank was open, a call got through and smashed his battle axe into Saphira's side. Saphira roared in pain. Arya reacted quickly. She raised her hand and quickly enchanted a spell. The green orb left her hand and blasted the Urgel away. Saphira pulled away from the battlefield with powerful wing strokes, but a rasping breath. "Are you okay?" Erogen asked, concern, worry and every other emotion billowing in his stomach. "My side hurts, the armor is squeezing my lungs." Saphira groaned. Erogen told Arya of Saphira's conditions and Saphira go up to the dragon hold. Stepping forward, the blonde-haired nin lowered his head, allowing a sword to pass over his head. Naruto took a step forward with his right, using the momentum to swing his tonfa. His metal tonfa hit the Urgel's face dead on. Instead of slicing as it normally would have done, the tonfa crushed the head. Naruto had stopped slicing and dicing because he had been spilling too much blood, literally. Naruto spun around the falling body of the Urgel so that he was crouched. He thrust his tonfa upwards so that the edge smashed into Urgel's jawline. Naruto sent wind chakra through the pipe. The pipe pushed the air through the pipe, concentrating it as it went. When the wind chakra hit the Urgel, it blew its head off clean. Naruto weaved through another axe, sword, and then lashed out with both his tonfa. This time he used an air wave. The tonfa directed the waves, crushing the Urgels into the tunnel walls. Their bones were either crushed or their bodies impaled by other fallen weapons. Naruto stepped back as the blood started squirting everywhere again. Naruto cracked his neck as he looked at the damage he had done. Naruto took in a deep breath and sighed. Damn it, I have to wash my clothes again. Naruto looked over himself with disgust and annoyance. He had gone a bit crazy with the hacking and crushing. He had cut through the army easily, it was more like practice than a workout. They moved slow, couldn't keep up with him, and the list goes on and on why these foes were child's play. Naruto wiped the blood from his face with his sleeve. He had cut an Urgel in half and paused too long, allowing some of the blood to splash onto his cheek. But that was 20 minutes ago, and he had killed over 5,000. He mainly used lancing wind techniques. Because the opposing army had no way to counter chakra-based techniques, Naruto was lazy and used mass area techniques. It was sloppy, but got the job done. And when Naruto was really bored, he would go hand to hand. And he got bored about an hour ago. Naruto cracked his neck and looked at the slow approaching force. Great, more of them, narrator thought. Naruto wondered where the leader was. It was obvious that the Shade Durza was the leader, he had heard from Ajahid about that. But where was he? He was probably about a mile and a half from Trondheim. Naruto put away his tonfa in the sheath. I'll go hand to hand, I need to review that. Naruto thought with some amusement. That was when he felt it. He felt the tug on his neck towards the right side. That meant only one thing, a Hirshin kunai had been thrown. Naruto immediately sent chakra through his dagger and his left hand. Naruto disappeared in a flash of yellow. Erogen glared at the person only a few paces in front of him. And all the Urgel surrounding him. Durza stood tall glaring at him. This was it, he was going to die. He had warned Saphira. But it was too late for her to come help him. He would go down fighting. There was no way to get help. Erogen jolted as he remembered the dagger. Erogen reached slowly into his armor, not taking his eyes for Durza. Durza charged at him, intending to slice him in half. Erogen grasped the dagger and threw it at Durza. It was a really clumsy throw, Erogen had hoped to use it as a distraction to catch Durza off guard. Durza didn't mind as he raised his sword to deflect it. Suddenly, flash of yellow appeared and roar erupted, Rasengan. Erogen stared as he watched Naruto suddenly appear with a blue spinning orb in his hand. The orb was beautiful as it rammed itself into Durza's sword, destroying it completely. Naruto yelled to Erogen, "Let's go, kid." Durza's eyes widened as he turned his attention towards Naruto, who now held Durza's entire arm, not letting go. Erogen lunged forward at Durza yelling on the top of his lungs. Brissinger. Erogen's sword lit up in flames and stabbed Durza in the heart. Durza tilted his head toward the ceiling. First shock, then anger contorted the Shade's face. And finally, Durza let louse an unearthly howl. His skin went transparent. Under it was neither flesh nor bone, but swirling patterns of darkness. Durza shrieked and burst into three entities. Darkness swirled the floor and faded slowly. The Urgels surrounding them were broken from their paws and roared. Erogen coughed as he stood up and looked around, panting. Naruto stood tall, not even wavering. Instead he raised his hand towards a nearby Urgel. "You did good, kid." The Urgels charged. Suddenly, a red-like beam erupted from Naruto's hand and shot into one of the Urgel's forehead. It cleanly pierced his head and then the beam spread from there. It charged and blew holes in each of the surrounding Urgel's faces. Naruto lowered his hand and the red energy disappeared. Erogen lowered his sword, energy sagging from his body. Naruto looked at Erogen and smirked at him. "Looks like you trusted me on the Hirshin." "Hirshin?" Erogen said, the word sounded awkward to his tongue. Naruto walked over to the discarded dagger and picked it up. "Yay, it was my dad's technique. Instant transportation." Naruto held out the dagger towards Erogen. Erogen nodded slowly. "Thanks." Erogen took the dagger and put it back on his armor. Naruto nodded. "Yay, well we better get going. There may still be Urgels around." Naruto started to walk away. Erogen stood there a bit dazed. The one thing running through his mind was, who was this man? "Here we go." Naruto took a deep breath as he sucked in the air. The stale air in the morning was nice. He had finished, or at least his clones, carrying bodies back for burial. The Varden was still curious, if not fearful, about his abilities. Some were saying he was a rider in disguise, but many crushed that idea. Naruto told everyone, or at least all the soldiers, he came across that he was no rider. He never told anyone where he really came from, not only would it be annoying and arduous to explain, he didn't want to think about that place. Naruto exhaled as he rotated the chakra in his palms. A blue orb sat in midair between his hands. Wind circled quickly but silently around it. It was good to practice this technique as it doubled as nature manipulation and chakra manipulation exercise. Rasengan was one thing, Wind Shuriken Rasengan was another, and Wind Ashura Rasengan was a completely new level. He had created the technique to crack through a certain ultimate shield. Naruto opened his eyes and cracked his neck. He let the chakra dissipate and stood up. Walking over to the chair that stood in front of the desk, he grabbed a rag that was on the bed. He wiped his face and sighed as he shook his head. The Varden was still picking up after itself from the fight. Kind of ridiculous really, for the war back home, everyone simply got everything together, picked up the debt and went back. No talks, no dilly-dally, everyone knew the routine and it didn't matter if they had won the war or not. They knew their jobs and didn't argue. But for the Varden, everyone was crying, screaming, arguing, squabbling, the usual civilian reaction to war. It was quite annoying, none of them were disciplined enough to suck it up and just roll with the punches to keep moving forward. Naruto reached into pouch and found his backup scroll and rubbed his finger over the soft white paper. One thing Naruto was grateful for was the leaders, Ajahid and Hrothgar. They were competent and led well. As soon as the battle finished, Ajahid made a backup troop ready and had the most injured and exhausted taken care of. He called back the women and children and made sure that everything and everyone was accounted for. He then set out to assess the damages and hunt the remaining Urgils in the tunnels so there would be less of a chance of a counterattack. This was a great idea. Hrothgar had equally impressed him. He has set up on creating another backup route away from the Varden. Not a large evacuee route but a smaller route enough for small groups to file through. Naruto had guessed this was for messengers since Naruto had heard rumors they were going to go to Sirta soon and the dwarves would need a passageway to get to Sirta. This showed adaptability. At first, Naruto thought these leaders would be like the stupid chumps back at home, but no, they were more like the cages. They were decisive, made the hard decisions and was very calculative. Naruto walked out of his room on the 170th floor or something like that. He stayed on top to not attract attention. Doubly sure since he was whispered about almost as much as erogen. He was the foreign warrior. Naruto walked towards the staircase, which was near the slide. Naruto sighed as he leaned back and cocked his back. It took forever to go down these stairs, but luckily, Naruto had found a solution to this. Naruto grabbed his secondary dagger on his belt and threw it down. The dagger whistled downwards towards the ground and Naruto looked down at it waiting. Naruto let his fingers tap against the cold stone of the railing. Then he heard a definite clang and nodded to himself. Channeling chakra to his dagger on his neck, Naruto allowed his body to be sucked in by the chakra. Naruto blinked once and bent down to pick up his dagger. The dagger had faithfully pierced the stone of the floor, showing how sharp Naruto maintained it. Naruto pocketed the kunai and looked around. Now which way was he supposed to go again? Erogen yawned as he stretched himself. He had just finished fixing a couple ramparts and rounding up some littered weapons. The bodies had been put away by Naruto, who had used his technique to make more of himself. It baffled Erogen how such a thing was possible. But then again, he had once thought magic was impossible as well. Erogen walked towards Saphira who was laying on the ground, bored. Erogen chuckled as he sent a tendril of thought towards her. Getting sleepy. Saphira rolled one of her eyes towards Erogen. Only because you are taking so long. Erogen shook his head and patted Saphira as he got close enough. I'm done now, let's go. A messenger ran up towards Erogen. Sir Erogen Shadowslayer. Erogen turned and nodded. He had gotten used to the Sir and the Shadowslayer part. Many people had heard of Naruto and Erogen's defeat of the Shade. Erogen had to remind himself constantly that he would not have defeated the Shade without Naruto's help, lest all the attention would go to his head. The messenger spoke quickly. Ajahid wants you to meet him at the entrance tunnels. He is returning from his hunt. Erogen nodded. Alright then, thank you. Erogen leapt onto Saphira. Saphira rose, eager to do something, and rolled her massive shoulders. She took off in one swing of her wings and flew off towards the entrance. Erogen looked over towards the entrance and saw, indeed, Ajahid was coming out of the tunnels. There were 20 guards around him and Murgath had also gone with him. Erogen knew that the twins were in there somewhere as well. Erogen relaxed as he let Saphira glide towards them. Ajahid looked at them and raised his sword in greeting. Erogen then saw something in the distance, his blood chilled. Urgils. Saphira flapped her wings as hard as she could to reach Ajahid. Erogen hoped they would not be too late. Naruto slurped his soup down in his little corner in the back. He put up his head so that he didn't attract too much attention. These people certainly like to praise their heroes. Naruto smirked as he realized he was running from attention when most of his life he had sought it. But that was long ago, he had already accomplished what he had set out to do and failed in others. Naruto dipped his bread into the bowl, scraping the bottom to collect the last of the soup and chomped on it. Naruto sighed as he munched slowly on his bread. He was bored. Maybe he could train the kid. He still needed a lot of work. But what? Swordsmanship wasn't his thing, and the boy was average in Taijutsu, but he would be mainly fighting with his sword. Pain endurance then. Naruto continued on this line of thought and tried to think what could the boy need. But then he felt the pull. Naruto, with the bread still in his mouth, disappeared in a flash of light. Murgath slashed downwards at the Urgel, splitting the head into two. The blood squirted over his face, but Murgath didn't even flinch. The twins had betrayed them. Murgath felt a presence next to him. Turning on his heel, he let out a swing. But the Urgel slashed downward with its axe and knocked the sword out of Murgath's arm. Shit, Murgath thought as he jumped back. Murgath looked over and saw only stragglers of Ajahid's guards standing by. A dust cloud had arisen to cover the battle, but Murgath could still make out the twins in the distance. A burning liquid arose in Murgath's stomach. Those bastards had betrayed them, they had to pay. Ajahid jumped to the side as the Urgel tried to strike him with its fist. Murgath reached into his tunic. He still had that dagger, he would throw it and kill at least one of those bastards. Murda threw it as hard as he could, hoping it would hit. Suddenly there was a flash of yellow. Naruto looked at the scene around him, taking it all in less than a second. Ajahid's men were dying. Murgath had thrown the dagger. The dagger was thrown at the twins. Urgels were around. None of them were attacking the twins. Twins were bad guys. But that meant they were spies. That meant they had to know something. Naruto immediately made a decision. Murgath watched in awe as Naruto suddenly appeared and decimated the Urgels. The yellow-haired foreigner bashed the heads of the twins, knocking them out, and then used the dagger to slit the throats of the Urgels. This all happened in less than 4 seconds. Naruto slit the last throat and sighed as he looked towards Murgath. "You alright, kid?" Murgath nodded dumbly as he stood up, reclaiming his sword as he walked towards Naruto. Naruto looked over and saw erogen land near someone. Naruto walked over slowly and blinked. Ajahid was lying on the floor bleeding, probably dying. Naruto sighed, fuck. A faint chill filled Naruto's stomach. The smell of blood, the smell of someone dying. He was powerless. He couldn't stop it. He couldn't. Naruto closed his eyes and shook his head. That was before, now he was different. Erogen knelt and grasped the hand of Ajahid. Ajahid was whispering towards Erogen, but Naruto could still hear. Well, better do something. Naruto thought. Naruto moved towards Erogen and Ajahid. Ajahid looked over towards Naruto and coughed. "Naruto, I am sorry I couldn't help. Save your strength. You will not die here today," Naruto said as he reached into the depths of his chakra pools to find a certain string of chakra. Ajahid chuckled hoarsely. "I don't think so." Another hacking fit in Ajahid sighed as he looked up. "Do not let the Varden fall into chaos." Naruto nodded. "Of course. Move aside, Erogen." Naruto motioned Erogen to move back to steps. Naruto then turned his face towards Ajahid. "But like I said." Naruto raised his right arm slightly. He had gotten the chakra to concentrate. "You will not die here today." Naruto stabbed downwards and allowed one of his fingers to stab through Ajahid's chest. Specifically 2 centimeters above the solar plexus, the main chakra node. Naruto pushed the chakra, the Kyuubi's purified chakra, into Ajahid's dying body. The Kyuubi chakra, now purified, did only one thing, enhance. And Naruto had no doubt that this would help Ajahid because he had done this before. Erogen, Saphira and Murgath watched in wonder as they saw a red glow cover Ajahid. There was a huge flash and then it was gone. "Here we go." A yellow-haired nin rested on the wooden beams that held the stone walls in place. The beams were just outside the council meeting place or whatever it was called. The weight of Naruto's years were finally crushing down on him. Granted, he was still young, but he had seen so much, lost so much. Yesterday he had done something he had never wanted to do again. Bring someone back from the brink. The Kyuubi chakra was now his to control due to the sage's chakra implanted in him. Also, the chakra signature from Itachi had help head too, but he had used most of that chakra in the fight with Madara. He had made sure that the Uchiha had a memorial. It was one of his greatest achievements, in his book at least. With the chakra signature of Itachi and Sage's chakra, he was able to manipulate the Kyuubi chakra and take out the malice. Sure, the chakra still had extreme properties, but it was still a powerful chakra. Not only that, it was harmonious with nature chakra, which meant Heckle gained even more control when he used it with Sage mode. He had used this control to inject emergency energy into Ajahid, letting the chakra rebuild his inner organs. Naruto didn't know if it would activate his chakra system or not, but it was unlikely. He wasn't a scientist like Shizune or Sakura, nor was he a genius like Shikamaru, but he did understand the basics of a chakra system. He had a lot of time to read stuff when he was in the Wind Temple for 5 years. These people were a mix, probably developing their chakra systems in their heredity genes. This was why some could do magic while others couldn't, at least in Naruto's theory. Naruto had heard from Erogen that the boy had felt a huge surge of pain once he touched Saphira. Naruto guessed that this was to develop the chakra systems or jump-started. Naruto couldn't get evidence, but he did theorize. These people had dormant chakra systems, very weak ones at that. But what made it fascinating was that the chakra was actually their stamina mixed with willpower. Brahm had told him of how magicians had to break into their stored energy and push the energy out. This was totally different from chakra, which run through your body and could be called from anywhere. There were two options to this. One, their chakra systems was totally different from theirs, or this was a new type of energy source that just used a similar system to the chakra system of the elemental countries. Naruto pondered the idea of a new source and all its potentials. Naruto closed his eyes. It was this knowledge that allowed him the confidence to use his flashback. Whatever you did to him, Naruto, you've saved his life. Angela said wearily as she looked over the Varden's leader. Naruto nodded slowly. I know, the energy I gave him was small but highly effective. Did you find anything abnormal? Angela shook her head. Only that he is in a state of deep sleep. I don't think he'll be waking up anytime soon. Naruto fell into an illusion again. White walls, monitors beeping, looking at the face he had been looking at for the past 10 days. You need to eat, Naruto. You need sleep, staying up won't help you. Don't torture yourself, it wasn't your fault. Naruto murmured to himself, I'm fine, but no one heard it. Naruto blinked once and the illusion faded. The dwarf moved forward and put his hand to his brow in deep regret. Oryx shook his head. Then who will lead us? Naruto's eyes flickered towards the girl sitting on the other side of the bed. naSaDa was her name. She had that feel, that aura, an aura of a leader. Naruto dissuaded these thoughts though. He was not the power here, the leader of the organization would be made by the people in power here. He had to respect that. He was the foreigner, of course. Flashback end. Naruto opened his eyes slowly. Ajahid wasn't that bad, actually not as bad as the first person he had used this on. Naruto scoffed. The first time he did it out of desperation. An icy grip clenched his chest, his blood inflamed with liquid fire. It hurt to think about it. It hurt when Sakura broke the news. It hurt when the people around him promised him they would catch that bastard. He had searched the lands for only a year. And then he got the call, that touch of the mind. To come here, to find the person, here. Naruto had come right away, not even bothering to tell anyone. They didn't need him, they were at peace. The elemental countries did not need a weapon anymore. The council had called Erogen to a meeting. It was laughable how similar it felt to his own bastard council. Overall, Naruto didn't care what they did, as long as it didn't constrict Erogen too much. He needed to train him. Erogen needed to be able to fight Galbitterix. Wait a minute, when did he start thinking that Erogen was going to kill Galbitterix? He could do it himself. Sure, it may be a tough fight, but he had fought an immortal and won. Naruto had yet to see a person that even looked remotely close to lasting a second to Madara. But for some reason, Naruto couldn't help but think about it any other way. If Erogen defeated the tyrant of the lands, then he would be a hero. The hero would be of these lands and a familiar figure, even if it was the stuff of legends. Naruto shook his head, but look at him. He was the hero of his lands and now he was here, rotting away. He was just hunting, scouring these lands for a clue, having a personal vendetta to fulfill. Naruto let his head drop in fatigue. What was he doing here? Was he some kind of idiot, trying to find something to survive, to hang on to like a tether? What would happen after he finished his vendetta? Return home or live the rest of his days out here? Naruto blinked, snapping out of these thoughts as he heard something interesting. Naruto sat up. It seemed they indeed chose naSaDa as their new leader, at least until Ajahid woke up. Naruto nodded to himself, she had the prowess of a leader or commander. Naruto put his head on his hand and sighed. Now they were talking about boring stuff. Naruto let his legs sway in midair. He watched as the men of the council filed out. Erogen and naSaDa were still inside though, Saphira was with them of course. Then Naruto suddenly couldn't hear anything in the room. What? He had been listening to Erogen speak to naSaDa and then Erogen spoke in the ancient language. Oh. Naruto grinned, now that was really interesting. Magic could block out chakra-enhanced hearing. But that meant it wasn't a spiritual-based force, but drew in physical attributes. Naruto bit his lip as this new problem aroused his mind. So if the magic uses physical strength, then like chakra, it can be stored and used to enhance the body. Naruto nodded to himself. He had felt energy coming from Erogen's ring, so he had believed that to be magic. Naruto didn't ask Erogen because he doubted he knew about it. Now how am I going to train him? Gravity seals with a low counter might be the best way to start, probably 1.20 or 1.3 if he can handle it. Start of low and work our way up to 2. Then he should be able to take on all conventional soldiers in Galbitterix's army, not to mention build up some stamina for his magic. Naruto bit his lip as he thought about this training regiment. It was funny because he had refused to take on a genin team after the war. But now he was willing to train this kid like his apprentice. Suddenly the doors opened and Erogen walked out. Naruto smiled as Saphira walked out as well. Erogen held a sense of pride on his face. What is that kid thinking about? Naruto jumped down, calling out. Finally done, kid. Erogen looked up and jolted as he saw Naruto jump down from the high beams of the corridor. Erogen felt his stomach clench as Naruto neatly landed on the ground without so much as a light thud. Erogen shook his head. I'll never get used to the things he can do. Saphira, who was a little more forgiving towards Naruto after he had saved not only Erogen but also Murta's and Ajahid's life, pushed a thought of amusement. That's because you are so thick-headed, little one. Erogen rolled his eyes. So kid, what did you do? Naruto asked. Erogen blinked as he realized what Naruto was asking about. Erogen scratched his head and opened his mouth. Naruto held up his hand. Let's talk about this on the way to some food and drink. Naruto motioned with his head towards the right side, the path towards the dining hall. Erogen started to explain what the Council of Elders want. Naruto was actually quite surprised at Erogen's observations and his decision-making with Saphira. It was actually a decision he might have considered. Though Naruto was particularly interested in Naruto's confession. That was a quality of a good leader. To lay down the facts unbiasedly and to make a judgment from that. Naruto approved of Erogen's decision to serve Naruto. You approve of it? Erogen said incredulously. He had half expected Naruto to call him an idiot for restricting himself. Naruto nodded. Loyalty is not bad, nor is inherently good. Blind loyalty is. But you understood your decision and made a choice. There are always benefits and consequences you must live with every choice. Naruto looked ahead, memories swirling within him. The choices he had made, the mistakes he had chosen. Erogen saw that Naruto was uncomfortable and looked forward. Saphira was following close behind. Suddenly there was a shout. What have you done? An angry voice cracked through the silence like a whip. Naruto had put a hand in his pocket to grab a kunai, but saw it was just the elf. Erogen looked shocked and confused. I do not know about elf customs, but have I done something wrong to offend you? Arya's eyebrows were slanted in a V, anger rolling off her. I have just heard from the Council of Elders that you intend to swear loyalty to them. Naruto rolled his eyes, she was making judgments without credible fact. Erogen held up his hands. I am not doing that. Then what? Arya growled. Are you planning? Have you forgotten the debt you owe the elves? Erogen felt his stomach grow cold. I do remember that debt, after all it is burnt in my flesh. Erogen showed his insignia on his hand. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Huh, and I thought Hiashi was strict on debts. After all, when Naruto had saved his life, Hiashi had paid his debt by Naruto's side as he thought about those times. Those were much brighter times. Arya, as if noticing his presence for the first time, what are you doing here? Naruto laughed. I can be wherever I choose, elf. You have no control over me, nor do you have any right to control Erogen. Erogen turned, he did not want this to escalate to a fight. Naruto, there is no need to antagonize, she didn't mean it. Era, please leave this be. Era paid no attention to him and just glared at Naruto. Naruto stood there, smiling, amused at the mere threat she could present to him. After a long silence, Era spun on her heel and left. Erogen shook his head in exasperation, that was not how he wanted this to go. Naruto shook his own head in amusement. Erogen looked at Naruto. Did you have to do that? Naruto looked back, smiling. No, but it was quite fun. Here we go. Naruto didn't sleep very long. He never did. Whether it be 4 hours or the occasional sweet 6, he never slept long. It was something he developed out of necessity, to be able to recharge his body as fast as possible and get out into the fight again. During the war, he would literally find an open tent, not even taking off his armor, hit the bed and fall asleep. As soon as he woke up, he would go out and start fighting. He was scheduled to be back in base every 2 days, though times he took on secret missions, leaving his cage bunchen at the bed. Only 2 people ever found out and the girls never told the commanders either. But now that the war had ended, he tried to get more sleep, tried to relax and enjoy peace. Until that happened, until his life fell apart and his world crumbled around him. He knew what was happening to him, the nightmares that kept him on edge, the signs of anger, of cynicism. He was becoming a monster. But if that's what it took to kill the other monster, he would do it. He didn't give a damn. Naruto leaned against the north gate of Trondheim, dawn was approaching, and Naruto decided it was time to get some fresh air before traveling to Ulmersia. Though Ajahid was unavailable, his deal still stood. And he would go with Erogen even if they didn't let him. He had finished cleaning out his wind tonfas and making sure they were in good condition. He had abandoned his sage clothes in favor of something more sturdier. He donned his Anbu issue equipment. He never got the mask, but everyone considered him Anbu or even cage level. He never wore the elbow guards, but the shin guard were welcomed. They hid his seals, gravity seals. He had reactivated them because he needed to keep in shape. He didn't make it overly hard because he was traveling and didn't want to burn out just in case anything happened. He trusted these people, yes, but not with his life. He had seen things they could not even fathom. They were ignorant and believed in their silly ways. He was better. Naruto immediately squashed that line of thinking. There it was again. It was that kind of thinking. That kind of ideology that would turn him into a monster, a corrupted fool who was mindless and saw no reason. A monster that should be put down. Naruto clenched his fists. He was a Jinchuriki, or at least former. He was a weapon without a place. Or at least, he was out of place. Maybe that was the reason why he had to come here. He was a curse to people, like sand to flowers. Naruto looked over, the sun peeking over the hills. A soft glow emitted from the bright star and onto his face. It was so warm, like a touch of soft, smooth hands. Naruto opened his eyes. There was someone in front of him, caressing his face. Naruto stood up and reached out towards this person, towards this warmth. As soon as he started to reach, it was gone. Like wisps of smoke in the air. Gone, gone, gone. Naruto blinked and sighed. The sun didn't feel warm anymore. Erogen waited with Saphira and Auric as they waited for their other few companions. Erogen held onto Snowfire's reins as it nickered impatiently. Auric looked around and growled. Barzel, where are those two? And I thought elves were the only ones late. That foreigner must be really something to make us wait like this. Auric looked over to Erogen, who shrugged. Erogen and Auric had friendly banter and had now been waiting for the other two for 10 minutes. Actually, we are only waiting for the elf. I have been here for quite some time. Erogen and Auric whipped their heads around in surprise. Naruto was standing on the ledge of the gate looking down on them. Erogen saw that the foreigner was smiling brightly, though the smile did not fit his eyes. It always puzzled and disturbed him how, no matter what face Naruto put on, it did not reach his eyes. Whether he was smiling, teasing, or even glaring, his eyes always had that monotone look, that deadness. It was like he had seen the end of the world, knew what was coming, and was just living out the rest of his life till it came. No hope. The blonde-haired man jumped down and Auric gaped in shock. Erogen, who had seen this before, was only mildly shocked. Naruto landed gracefully on the ground without so much of a small thud. Well then, Naruto started. Naruto looked over to Auric. Where is our first stop and how far is it? Auric, hiding his surprise of the jump, spoke confidently, not very far, we will not even need horses. We will be going to Tarnag, just north of here. From there we take rafts along the Osragni to Hedderth, an outpost for trading with the elves. Air had finally come with Nausada and Jormunder. They said their goodbyes and finally set off. 3 days later, Naruto was getting impatient. It was one thing to travel in a group. It was another to travel this slowly. He had half the mind to pick everyone up, Saphira included, and just run. But alas, they had to go slow. Naruto took the time to go over the tenets of the new law for the elemental countries. He had been forced to memorize them, as he was expected to be one of the 5 leaders of the country, shinobi. Ironic how the military had disbanded in favor of police and was still called shinobi. He had given up his spot before he was ever put on and favored in giving his spot to Shikamaru, who was infinitely more shrewd and smarter than him, and personal reasons factored in as well. Naruto reviewed them in his head because they were the only thing complicated and boring thing he could think of. Yes, there were the laws and properties of sealing, but he had those in his head like second nature, so it would be useless to review them. He had yet, of course, to discover the principles of magic or learn the ancient language in a proper fashion. But that was just backwater details, extra stuff he had no need for or just to pass the time. They had gone into the dwarven halls and eaten. Erogen was swarmed of course, by admirers and warriors alike. They all came to see the Shadow Lair. Naruto was actually surprised how fish to water Erogen took it. For a farmer's son, he certainly took the life of a warrior pretty well. Naruto still remembered the time where he would hide in an alley to hide from the stares, the cheers, the admiration, all after the war of course. It was kind of overwhelming to deal with that kind of emotion en masse. Naruto shook his head as he walked towards a building that seemed to be a temple. Naruto heard clang of wood and metal and his interest was piqued. Weapons, in his lands, were never allowed in the sanctuaries. Monks would have to practice their art outside or in sanctioned areas. Naruto climbed the last remaining stone steps and walked through the door, silently. By silently, he meant he suppressed his chakra, held his breath and slowed his heart. Old habits die hard. Naruto raised an eyebrow at what he saw. The dwarves were sparring with a weapon he had seen on that witch Angela. Interesting, Naruto thought. He also saw Erogen talking to one of the priests. No one had noticed his presence, so Naruto shadowed Erogen silently as they drank ale and discussed. Finally the dwarf that seemed to be in charge stood up. Come, I will show you something that no outsider has been taught. It is something you as a rider must know. Erogen was confused. As a rider? The dwarf nodded. You will be taught with terms that may not be to your understanding. Religious terms only known to the dwarves. That is why I have been told to instruct you in our ways. It is not to convert you but for you to understand what we believe in. Erogen nodded slowly. Anil, as Naruto found out his name to be, walked slowly through the halls, teaching Erogen. Naruto observed quietly, hiding in the shadows. Though he was more interested in the architecture, he had seen deities before but never really bothered to examine. It was fascinating what people could create or what images they believed the Shinigami and his brethren were. Each to their own, of course, he had no right to call it wrong, only those who blindly disbelieved or believed were at fault. Suddenly, Naruto felt Erogen's presence dampen as if smudged or blocked by a white sheet. Naruto whipped his head around and saw Erogen putting on a necklace. What the hell, Naruto thought. What was that? Some kind of blocking mechanism made from magic. Naruto dropped down and followed them as they walked out towards the main area of the temple. Naruto's mind racing on the possibilities of having magic dampen your presence. It would make sneaking so much easier. Imagine hiding your already very quiet presence. You would need the Sharingan or the Byaku dot. Naruto stopped and saw that the elf was approaching. Grimsbirth. Era said while inclining her head. Ganel said neutrally. You have been educating Erogen in your mythology. Ganel smiled flatly. One should always understand the faith of the society that one interacts with, yet comprehension does not imply belief. She fingered the pillar of an archway. Nor does it mean that those who purvey such beliefs do so for more than material gain. Naruto snorted quietly. She was implying that they were using faith as simple as money grubbing. He had seen faith used for immortality. You would deny the sacrifices my clan makes to bring comfort to our brethren? The dwarf asked pointedly. And then it erupted. Naruto had to admit as he followed the argument. Both put up valid arguments, though the elf was doing quite well. Naruto moved next to Erogen, who jumped in surprise, yet the two arguing sides had yet to notice him. Finally, Era said, her tone implying she felt superior, that is the difference between us, Grimsbirth. You devote yourself to that which you believe to be true but cannot prove. There we must agree to disagree. Naruto chuckled quietly and shook his head. Era and Grimsbirth turned. Era narrowed her eyes while Grimsbirth widened his. Era spoke quietly, what are you doing here? Naruto smiled sweetly at her. Oh, don't worry, I was following the whole entire argument just for fun. Naruto started as he put his hand to his chin. You imply that he cannot prove the concept of a god, but you cannot disapprove that one exists. Era opened her mouth to argue. Naruto held out his hand to stop her. Era caught herself and glared at him, though letting him continue. Naruto raised one finger. There are several flaws. 1. You are immediately eliminating an option because you have no evidence. That is a fatal flaw. Just because there is no evidence doesn't mean it doesn't exist. To eliminate a possibility without evidence is the same thing as claiming something without evidence. Era crossed her hands and Ganel raised an interested eyebrow. You also assume the fact that you cannot prove there is the concept of God. Naruto continued, still smiling. Era now spoke quickly, can you? Naruto smiled even wider. I can. The other three occupants in the room jolted in shock. Era was quick to respond and recover. How? Tell me how you can magically call your god. Naruto didn't even falter. Erogen and Ganel looked at Naruto in amazement. Naruto spoke slowly. Let me tell you a little tale. Once upon a time, Naruto started while chuckling. There was a man who faced innumerable odds, a demon. Era raised an eyebrow. To defeat the demon, he called upon the Shinigami, or death god in your language, to reap the soul of the demon at the cost of his own. He sealed the demon's soul and energy into his son. With me so far. Era scoffed. And do you have evidence of this? Naruto smiled and closed his eyes. Not perturbed by Era's sarcastic tone, he continued. His son is still alive. Era and Ganel shared an exchange and looked back. Where is he then? Erogen asked, his interest burning. Just a moment, let me continue. Naruto said, cutting them off from questioning, his eyes still closed. The son went on and lived his life, facing many challenges. But over time, he grew to use his demon and finally absorb it. And with that, the son could feel the presence of the Shinigami through nature though. It's more part to my sage training, Naruto thought to himself, while slightly nodding. Era couldn't take it any longer. How do you know this? Where is the evidence for this fictitious story? Or is that man you spoke of earlier just a falsification? Naruto's face stilled and his face scrunched. The room suddenly grew chillier. Naruto spoke very quietly once more, yet it seemed all of them could hear his words on full blast. The occupants of the room felt a sudden chill. The walls of the grand temple seemed to close in on them, suffocating them. Each of them felt a tingle as instincts screamed to grab their weapons or run. I will not have you call my father false. Naruto opened his eyes for all to see. His eyes were blood red, slitted and held malice. Era stepped back, Ganel gasped his eyes wide. Erogen felt his legs go weak. Naruto blinked once and suddenly the eyes were back to their normal hue. Era was quiet as looked away from Naruto. Ganel just kept staring in open shock. Erogen, finding his voice, asked, so that energy earlier, the red energy was the energy of the Kyuubi or the nine-tailed demon fox? Naruto said as he turned towards Erogen. It's dead now, I absorbed its energy, killing it. My father was very good at what he did. Naruto turned back to Era, who had found some confidence to look at Naruto. Now I expect you to not be so disbelieving on others' religions. Each holds truth and good for every person. While some may blindly believe it, others choose it on their own will. You have no right to say otherwise. Naruto walked past Era and Ganel and out of the temple. Erogen stared at his back in awe. Day later, Era evaded Naruto like the plague for the rest of yesterday and today. Erogen could barely speak to him at times. Neither of them told anyone excluding Saphira anything that happened at the temple. Erogen was pretty sure that Gandalf didn't either. Erogen sat at the edge of the raft looking out at the mountains. It was very peaceful. Erogen let his thoughts wander as he thought about his situation. Morgath, the Varden, the Empire, Naruto, Era, elves, home. Erogen sighed as he felt someone sit next to him. "What are you thinking about, kid?" A familiar, yet now foreign, voice asked. Erogen looked over to see Naruto sitting on the bench sipping out of an extremely small bowl. Erogen ignored the bowl because it was probably from Naruto's culture. Erogen looked at Naruto with curiosity and confusion. Here was a man, a warrior, spending his time traveling. What was he doing here? Why was he even helping the Varden? Naruto had told Ajahid that it was for personal reasons and he wanted information. Was that information in Ilmersia? Erogen let go of these thoughts in favor of answering Naruto's question. "Everything that's happened to me," Erogen said as he felt stream rush under him. Like a racing wind, it moved quickly but very quietly, so much so that he had to strain his ears to hear it. Naruto turned and smiled at him. "Seems like a dream, right?" Erogen, jolted that someone understood what he felt, nodded vigorously. "Like I am going to wake up any second." Naruto chuckled and then his eyes softened yet held a bitter taste. "And then later on you're hit with the fact that this is happening, that you are stuck here, having to decide your own fate." Erogen nodded slowly as he looked down at the water. It was so blue, so clear. He saw fish swim under and around the raft. He saw some rocks flip over each other. "Yeah," Erogen said quietly. He wondered how Rorin was doing. What had his actions caused for Rorin? Naruto raised an eyebrow at the sudden sullen look. Was he too cynical? "You got family, kid?" Erogen nodded. "Yes, my cousin, Rorin." Naruto nodded appreciatively. "Good, anyone else?" Erogen shook his head. "My mother, but she left me with my uncle, Garo, that is before the Razak came." Naruto immediately felt the past tense used. Naruto felt a pang of pity for the boy. He had no idea how to deal with everything, no preparation, no nothing, yet he did it somehow. Naruto put down his bowl and sighed. He had heard what happened to Erogen through Saphira and Morgath. It was not a pretty story. Naruto shook his head. Looking over to the young warrior, Naruto examined him. He was made of strong stuff, that kid. Erogen's eyes told him a lot. The eyes of the hopeful, determined and strong. He had seen those eyes in a lot of people and in a mirror, once upon a time. Naruto looked at the water. His eyes were dead now. Sullen, dark, broken. These were the eyes of a savage monster. Naruto looked back at the kid and shook his head. The kid was what he once was. Erogen had the potential, of course, but he did not have the environment. He was too easily influenced, too new to this. Naruto, when he had gotten the experience, he had spent years by himself, forming his own path. Naruto turned back to the mountains, saw how tall they stood, how firm they were. He was like that, or he once was. Naruto let his thoughts drift once more, going back through everything he had gone through. He always knew that blood must be spilled. He knew war, he had ended war. This kid, on the other hand, was on the stepping stone to it, without so much as a lick of experience or acquired and activated talent to back it up. He had seen how good he was with a sword. It was pretty damn nice to have that much skill, but there were too many flaws. The kid wouldn't last against many top-tier commanders or very long battles, Naruto guessed. But there was one thing that Naruto saw in Erogen, very similar in himself, his previous self, that was naiveness. "Why do you fight?" Naruto asked quietly. He had been asked this question once. By a white-haired, pervert, sage that he had loved like a grandfather. This accusation was one of the most tantalizing and frustrating things he ever dealt with. Erogen looked at Naruto, his face etched with confusion. "Why do I fight?" Erogen questioned, as if he was unsure what the question meant. Naruto nodded slowly. "Why?" Erogen looked at the water, looking at what he had become, and answered slowly, but not confidently. "To defeat Galbatorix and to bring an end to his tyranny." Erogen looked at his reflection in the water. He was no longer a farmer. He was a warrior, a figure of hope. He could not falter, nor could he be indecisive. But why did he fight? Naruto was quick to respond, quick to smash Erogen's illusion. "Really now? You do know, your existence will drive families apart, will make men fight against their will. And you will have to kill them all the same." Erogen whipped his head around towards Naruto, his eyes wide. But it is their choice. They can choose to rebel." Naruto shook his head. "Not if people threaten their loved ones. What you are doing right now will be the same as you ripping their families apart. You will disturb peace that has been brought to them under the rule of a king." Erogen gripped his fists. "But Galbatorix killed the riders, he killed people who stood by justice and peace, the rushing water was now deaf, the mountains didn't seem appealing anymore." Erogen gave his full attention to the blonde philosopher in front of him. "I have seen people who strove for peace but instead caused chaos." Naruto interrupted. Do not dedicate yourself to the unachievable, do not dedicate yourself to a concept in the back of people's minds. Peace is not an option when you hold a blade in your hand. Justice is not an option when you kill a man. When either side raises an arm against one another, both sides are evil. How can you say that? Erogen said exasperatedly. His mind trying to comprehend what Naruto was saying, but it was too much. We try to free people, we are dedicated to the cause of bringing people together. Naruto shook his head once more. He had to guide the kid on a bit more, just like Jiraiya did with him. I have seen people drive themselves mad to pursue one goal. It is the nature of humanity to believe themselves right, but are you truly right, Erogen? I ask you again, why do you fight? Erogen was silent, totally at lost. What was he fighting for? He tried to open his mouth to speak but couldn't. Naruto saw it, this was the point he was waiting for. He, at one point, was like Erogen. Naive, without a true resolution. He stupidly believed in something without actively choosing it. It was like how he spouted being Hokage because it was the only thing he heard of. He had been shown a goal and was pushed towards it. It was only when he stopped himself, took everything away and then chose his own path that he truly became powerful. What about your cousin? Naruto asked quietly. That was the Ramen level question. Jiraiya had asked about his friends, but this would have a better impact. Erogen jolted. His cousin, he had forgotten about Rorin. But didn't he just talk about him only moments ago? Yes, he first set out from his home to get revenge, to protect his cousin. To protect Carver Hill. He was not out here to start a war, to end a tyranny, but to protect his family, his village. Erogen nodded to himself, and Naruto smiled as he watched a very young dragon rider pick himself up. The young warrior looked at the older one, with a steady gaze. I fight to protect. Naruto nodded approvingly, he saw the fire burn in Erogen's eyes. Very good, you have found your answer. Erogen then noticed something. Was Naruto pushing him along? Taking him down teachings and making him learn? Why are you doing this? Erogen asked, confusion evident in his voice. Naruto blinked. Teaching you? Erogen nodded once. Naruto chuckled. Because you have the potential for power. And power without moral is chaos. Erogen tilted his head. So you are trying to understand my morals. But, Naruto raised his hand. In your early lives, you have set morals given to you by people of power. You do not understand but you accept it nonetheless. What I am trying to do is strip away the morals and give you your own. Erogen was quick to respond, his mind racing at this new topic. But what if some of their morals are things I accept? Naruto nodded. But you must actively accept it. To just say, I accept and believe this because someone else told me it, is not enough. You must say I believe in something for these reasons. Blindly following is a sin in itself. Erogen nodded, understanding. How did you learn all this stuff? Naruto chuckled. A monk told me. Erogen continued on, wanting to grasp more information. You keep talking about chaos, why? Naruto raised an eyebrow. Chaos versus order. A simple concept really. Things cannot be categorized as good and evil because everyone's perception is different. While others may think killing is evil, other people may think it is justified. Therefore it is impossible to say good and evil unless you want to be a hypocrite. Naruto recited Jiraiya's teachings. Naruto stood up and brushed his pants of the invisible dust. Naruto turned to Erogen and smiled. He would give Erogen another one to chew on. I will give you a second question. When you kill a man, what happens? Erogen looked up. I killed a person. I have taken a life, but I do so to protect myself and those I care about. Erogen knew that was his answer. Naruto smiled. Oh really, you have just killed a father, you just killed a brother, a son, a cousin, a father, a husband. Think about it. They are also trying to protect someone, do you have any right to stop that? Erogen froze in his tracks. His mind still thinking, trying to come up with an answer. Naruto smiled and nodded sagely, as if he had been expecting this all along. Naruto turned around and started to walk to the cabin area of the raft. Wait, aren't you going to tell me the answer? Erogen called out. He was stumped, he wanted to know. Naruto turned towards Erogen, a smile etched on his face, a glimmer that had not been there before in his previously dead eyes. That is something you have to figure out for yourself, Gaki. Erogen blinked and watched as Naruto entered the cabin, the door shutting behind him in a resounding thud. Here we go. Erogen yawned as he awoke. He had stayed up for a while, learning for Arya. She had been teaching the customs of the elves. The group of dwarves, humans, a dragon and an elf had been traveling in cinch. While the dwarves would converse with the humans, the elf mainly kept to herself. Erogen spent most of his day learning about the dwarves and talking with Naruto. Naruto's questions still tantalized him, making him stare up at the stars in wonder. Erogen understood what Naruto was doing, or at least he thought he did. It was like passing on knowledge or an understanding. It was like Naruto knew what kind of pressure Erogen was in and the feeling of blindly following something without actually understanding. Naruto said that it was the greatest fault to blindly follow something, to blindly accept something as real. Erogen understood that as well. Saphira even joined in on the long talks. Saphira had long since forgiven Naruto for humiliating Erogen and was now talking with him on even terms. Saphira had told Erogen about the feeling of debt she felt from Naruto. Erogen felt it as well. It was like Naruto, or at least how Naruto presented himself, was like a wall or door, hiding an infinite storage of something. Erogen looked up and saw Saphira shaking herself awake. The dwarves, who were always early risers, were packing up their tent. Erogen, getting up quickly, moved to help them. Auric, walking up to Erogen, grunted a greeting at him. "Morning Erogen, how are you?" Erogen nodded. "Fine, we are almost to Ulmersia." Auric nodded. "Yes, but we have not even a single sign of another Alphara village. I am getting worried that we might be lost." Arya, who was walking out of her tent, called out. "Do not worry, not even in 100 years would I forget the way to my homeland." Auric nodded as he scanned the camp. "Where is Naruto?" Erogen looked around. "He's probably up and about already. He always is an early riser." Erogen had learned from Garo that people who rose early were either used to it or couldn't sleep. Erogen had been an early riser for a time but fell out of habit due to the amount of traveling he had been doing. That took a toll on the body and he needed more rest. Auric looked at Naruto's tent, which was near the tree line. "I will go check." Auric walked over to the tent to see if Naruto was awake or not. There was a quietness to this place that did not make sense to Naruto. Naruto looked around him and only saw forest. He had been scouting ahead in the forest for his team. They were preparing to raid a fort of Kabutos. If he was attacked, he could easily Hirishin back, but he would rather just destroy his enemies rather than waiting. Naruto crept forward slowly. He had no doubt that he was already detected. But he needed to act ignorant if he was to draw out the people who were watching them. Naruto moved slowly but surely toward a clearing. He felt a change in the wind and froze. 3 people were moving slightly to his right side. That meant there was at least 1 person waiting to his left. Naruto bit his lip. How should he approach this? Should he move to the right and destroy the distraction? Or try and hit the hidden assailant on his left? Naruto didn't have time to choose as he felt a wind to his left side. Naruto leaped forward, grabbing the person's shoulder, pushing forward. He pushed his attacker easily to the ground and used his forearm to lock the person's throat. Grabbing his kunai from his leg sheath, he spun it in his right hand and stabbed downwards. Arzel. Naruto froze. What? Naruto's world suddenly righted itself. His arm was pinning down one of the dwarf, Auric. He had his kunai only a few inches above the dwarf's eyes. He was sweating and shaking slightly. Naruto immediately knew what had happened and got off the dwarf quickly, sheathing the kunai in his leg sheath. Auric, who was swearing in dwarvish, coughed. Naruto grabbed Auric's forearm and helped the dwarf up. Naruto, who still had adrenaline pumping through him, panted out, "My apologies." Naruto brushed the sweat that had built up on his forehead and sighed. Auric looked at him wearily. "That is the last time I wake you up." Naruto chuckled bitterly, "Sorry, I was having a memory go through my head." The dwarves and even Arya nodded. They had heard of those who had been in war having nightmares. It was a nightmare that played on their memories, making them remember haunting things. Naruto looked over to his tent and shook his head once more, embarrassed at the fact that he had lost control like that. Naruto moved over to the tent and sealed it into his scroll easily. The rest of his group were not surprised at it, as they had seen it done multiple times. The mixed group continued on their journey deeper into Ulmersia. Erogen, who had been disturbed by Naruto's sudden and surprising awakening, shot a glance at the foreigner. Naruto had taken to riding a horse, though he had initially said it to be very dreary to ride. Naruto had explained horses made you an easy target if you weren't aware. Erogen countered saying that it was unlikely that anyone would attack this group. But Naruto had simply said to never assume you were safe. Erogen wondered if that meant you always had to live your life in fear. Erogen switched his thoughts back to the question he had still been struggling with. What did happen when you kill a man? Naruto had said he had killed a brother, a father, a husband. But that person had raised a blade against him. What did that mean? Erogen shook his head in frustration. Auric, who had been riding next to him, looked over and raised an eyebrow. What is it? Auric asked, interested at what was frustrating the rider. Erogen looked over and sighed. I am dealing with a conundrum, a puzzle. What happens when you kill a man? Auric's face turned into confusion. Then after a moment's thoughts, Auric closed his eyes and nodded. I see, you are learning how to become a leader. It was Erogen's turn to be confused. A leader. Auric nodded. Leaders struggle with questions down to the basis of our being. If we do not understand the basics for ourselves, how can we build a foundation? It is an old dwarven saying. Let the base be strong so my mountain will never fall. Auric nodded. Erogen, distracted and interested, continued on with his questioning. How do you know all this? Are you becoming a leader as well? Auric scratched his beard. Hrothgar would often teach me on long marches or during training when I was much younger. It was very long ago, but I still remember all his teachings. He told me it was strengthen my base and harden my stance. Auric looked over and gave a small smile. It seems you are doing the same. Erogen, realizing the misunderstanding, scratched his head. It wasn't me who thought of this question, it was Naruto. He proposed it towards me. Auric was taken aback at the mention of the foreigner. He had never thought that the foreigner would pose moral questions like that, especially to Erogen. Really now? HMPH, Auric looked over to the blonde man who was riding ahead with renewed interest. It looks like there is a lot more we don't know about him. Auric's eyes turned sharp but not harsh. Erogen nodded as he followed Auric's gaze. Yes, there was a lot they did not know about him. But, back to the question. Auric intervened in Erogen's thoughts. Erogen turned, eager to hear. But then he froze. Why did it feel wrong for Erogen to want the answer? It felt awkward, as if he was accepting something disfigured or wrong. Surely, Auric would not mislead him. No, he had been growing friends with the dwarf. Then why? Erogen realized that Naruto had wanted to find his answer on his own. Erogen turned to Auric and spoke carefully. I've realized I probably should work on this my own. Erogen paused and added. If I want to strengthen my own stance. Auric gave a chuckle at the saying and nodded. Well, we can always debate about it. For example, what happens when I sink my axe onto an Urgel's skull? Erogen smiled. Well, first of all you would have to be high enough to hit that high, Auric spluttered at the jab. Naruto smiled at the exchange behind him. It was nice to see Erogen getting along, but Naruto had more important things to worry about. Someone was watching them. He couldn't tell who or where, which was extremely disturbing. Ever since they entered the deeper areas of the forest, it seemed like eyes was all around them. He couldn't sense a humanoid presence or any other presence at all. He was tempted to call upon the nature chakra but did not want to halt the group just so he could sate his curiosity. If the watchers had wanted to attack, they would have done so long ago. He would wait. He would see if they attacked and then he would kill them. Naruto allowed himself a mere glance to the side and looked straight ahead. It was only an hour later did Naruto feel a solidity of presence. Unlike the whisper of foggy presence he had felt earlier, this one was definitely there. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he moved forward. Arya had taken the lead, she had stiffened as well. It was only a couple of seconds later that Arya stopped and got off her horse. The rest of the group looked in curiosity, but Naruto moved his hand to his kunai. His eyes flickered from Arya to the location where he sensed the presence. Should he try and get them out of that hiding spot? Would that leave everyone else open? He knew magic needed words and will, but he did not know what it could do. He had to be careful. He stopped as Arya started to speak towards the presence. At this Naruto let his hands dropped. It was obvious they were friends, or at least allies. The way Arya was relaxed and her keen intent to talk, that was enough to let Naruto know. I am Arya spoke and suddenly the people who had been watching him jumped down. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the next scene. He had always viewed Arya as a personality like Konohamaru's girlfriend, Hanabi. But to see her acting joyfully in public, Hanabi only cracked her persona in private from Konohamaru's reports, was quite interesting. Naruto shrugged and waited for the scene to be over. The elves finished their happy fun time and turned to greet the other people. Naruto nodded once as the elves nodded their heads towards him. Naruto moved the horse a little back so he could survey the scene. The other dwarves, besides Auric, would be heading back as they completed their duty. Naruto nodded at them, a well-wishing for safety, handing over his horse. Sir, if I may, who are you? One of the elves asked. Naruto smiled, politely. It is proper, at least in my country, to know the person who I am speaking to first. The elf nodded quickly, still jittery from seeing Arya. My name is Nari. Naruto nodded. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto had never taken on his father's name. He never got used to it. The other elf came forward and answered as well. I am Liffen. Naruto nodded back. As we are all introduced, shall we continue on? The elves agreed, including Arya, and the new group set off. As they walked, Naruto carefully watched the movements. The elves were graceful, that much he could tell. Fluid yet held a strength, Naruto attributed it to the magic. Brahm had told him that magic was in their blood and any of elves could do it. But he also said that their physical strength surpassed most humans. Naruto understood that from Arya, but what confused Naruto was their presence. It seemed tied. What was more confusing was that it seemed similar to Pain's connection. Not exactly, but it was like a chakra line or wisps connecting them to the surrounding forest. Was this magic? Naruto saved his observations for a later date and focused on moving towards Elismera. Later, it had only been 2 days, and Naruto was already getting annoyed with the other elves. It wasn't that they were pestering him. It was their giddiness. It amused him that he preferred Arya's all business and no fun attitude than her now laughing carefree sort of thing. It felt odd. Naruto shook his head. It wasn't his place to judge, but the elves were damn strange. Even civilians, in his home, were still sharp and not ignorant. They all knew when to be serious and when to work. They should be rushing on their two limbs to Elismera instead of jaunty traveling on the new steeds. Naruto was jogging next to them, he didn't want to ride another horse. They had passed an apparition and supposedly in Elismera, but he had yet to see a sight of a clearing. "We will stay here for the night," Arya called out. Naruto sighed inwardly. Shit, he wanted to meet the person who had contacted him quickly. Even if he had decided to help Erogen, that did not mean he would stop his original goal. But they did talk about how they needed to hide Erogen so that there wouldn't be riots. Naruto sighed as he put his pack down and unsealed his tent. Erogen was working with Oric to set up the dwarfs. Naruto blinked as the dwarf and Erogen continued to talk jovially. Good, at least he's making friends. Naruto stopped and then chuckled at himself. What was he acting like? He wasn't Erogen's parent. He was merely a passing teacher and maybe, later on, a comrade. Naruto rummaged through his bag he had recently unsealed and then paused. HMPH, I thought I had thrown this away. Interesting. Naruto spoke quietly. Naruto took the cloth and metal out as he stared at the worn cloth and shiny metal. Naruto smiled as he traced over the single inscription, the scratches, and the memories. He had taken it off after the war. He swore that he would create a world where no one needed it. He had succeeded. What is that? A voice entered in his head. Naruto blinked as he realized the voice was Saphira. Naruto smiled to himself as he thought back, it is insignia. Allegiance. I am not sure how to put it, but it represents who you work for. Saphira moved slightly closer with her head. Naruto felt the hot breath from the female dragon. Is it special? Naruto shook his head. It means nothing now. My lands have long disbanded that system and settled for one united country. Saphira moved back, a bit confused. Were you not allied before? Naruto gripped his headband. Yes, we were engaged in many blood fights. But surprisingly, a common enemy helped us rise up and band together. Naruto closed his eyes and remembered the war. Saphira noticed and left Naruto to his peace. Later on that night, Naruto woke up with a start. He had his kunai in his hand, chakra running through his blood. Naruto, through the slit of his tent, Arya and the other elves were restricting Oric and Erogen. Naruto moved out of his tent and looked at Arya curiously, what is going on? Nari turned, surprised. You are not affected. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Affected by what? Arya stood up as Erogen and Oric calmed down. The music. Liffen came up and spoke, his voice in awe, it usually has adverse effects on humans, can you not hear it? Naruto blinked as he felt something try to warp him. It was such a low level or not a Sharingan Jinjutsu that he barely noticed it. Oh, I never noticed that low level Jinjutsu. Interesting. Naruto murmured as he put his hand to his cheek in thought. Erogen held his head in confusion and disorientation. What was that? The elves started to explain, but Naruto simply laughed to himself, he was getting sloppy. Naruto listened to the explanation. The singing day was called Dagshulgar. It was an elvish holiday where the elves would sing out spells to encourage the forest's fertility, they caused the trees to bud and the animals to mate. Interestingly enough, it was similar to the hermit Jinjutsu. Using the ears as a method of genjutsu, since ear buds also connected to your brain. But Naruto's body was laced with hyperchakra, so the Jinjutsu had beyond magnitude of a Sharingan level, though he did get caught by Kurenai's one time, but that was also when he was distracted. Arya, as she listened her fellow kin explained to Erogen, looked over to Naruto. This man was powerful. Either he had simply overcame the effects or they had not effect on him at all. The rest of the trip was mostly uneventful. Barring a couple of tension situation between Naruto and the elves, the real action was happening elsewhere. 8 people walked onto the shore near the bottom of a tall range of mountains. They were called for into these lands. They moved with efficiently as they scouted the area, making sure it was secure. Without signal, communication or motion, they set about their work. 2 of them moved towards the boat to get supplies and so on. The rest of them started to set camp. One of them sat down on a rock holding a picture. Another one of the group moved over and looked at our picture. Our mission. The one sitting down nodded. Yes, our mission. The picture of a group of people of all ages, but one blonde boy in the center. Naruto sneezed as he walked towards through the treehouses. Someone must be talking about me. Maybe Bachan or Kakashi-sensei, Naruto thought. He shivered at the thought. They must be trying to find where he was. He had guarded his tracks well, none of them, not even the remnants of the Akatsuki could find him. The Akatsuki had indeed expanded their ranks during their time. They took on desperate nins, nuke nins and used them. Madara had even used his Sharingan on some of them, changing their past, making it so twisted that it was better to give the person death than try to help them. None of them were exactly dangerous to Naruto, but he could see them killing off some of these people. Naruto looked around at the large trees, trying to banish the morbid thoughts. Feels like Konoha, Naruto thought as he smelled the leaves, the bark, the grass. Erogen was looking around in wonder, and Naruto smiled to himself. He looked like a little genin, being surprised at everything. Naruto smiled dimmed as he realized how long that would possibly last. Or if it should even last that long. As they walked through great doors, reminding Naruto of the Konoha gates, Naruto looked at the semicircle of elves. Naruto scoffed internally and realized this was probably the same council thing. Naruto had a mind right there to just start pissing people off for the hell of it, but immediately shut down this thought. This was not Konoha, this was not his land. He may be feared for his power in his land, but he knew nothing about how the elves dealt. Naruto focused as he noticed that all of the others had knelt. Naruto rolled his eyes internally and put his hands together and did a bow of greeting. Unlike the others, he did not kneel as it would signify loyalty, he was not bound to anyone anymore. The queen, dressed in red robes, moved swiftly down. She stepped in front of Arya and told her to rise. What happened next surprised Naruto. He always knew that Arya had an air of authority, but this was not what he had in mind. Naruto laughed at himself though, he had seen many interesting things in supposed heirs and royalty. After Arya had started to explain the story, Naruto keyed in on the events. Naruto had to admit she had a bad experience, but it wasn't anything new. He had seen worse, he had seen darker things. As Arya finished her story, Naruto could tell the room was tense. The queen asked for forgiveness, and Naruto was about to bang his head against the wall. This was some formal shit that needed to be fast-forwarded in Naruto's opinion. Even nins, who were very stealthy, deceptive and so on, would just tell what they really thought with their allies. They didn't need to hide anything because they entrusted their back to the person next to them. Arya forgave her mother, and the two elves embraced. Naruto sighed as he wondered how long this would take and if he should start practicing senjutsu. Finally, the queen turned to Erogen and greeted him. You have a powerful name. One we do not give to our children, the queen said. Erogen nodded, showing his acceptance. Then he explained the situation and pleaded, on the behalf of TenchiSaWaDa, for help. Naruto waited as they expressed the pleasantries, with queen accepting. Naruto had already started to practice ninjutsu at this point. Breath in. Naruto took a deep breath as he focused on the surroundings. And out. Naruto let the air exit him, but the feeling of nature enter. It wasn't enough to go into full senjutsu, but it was always good to remind himself how to get the chakra quickly. Finally, the queen turned to him. I do know the others, but who might you be? And I am wondering why you do not kneel like they do. Naruto looked up. Did I insult them? Naruto spoke in his own tongue. May you find peace in your life. And never be tied down by the world. Naruto spoke the old wind monk greeting. The queen raised an eyebrow in surprise, and Naruto continued. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I am here as a deal with Ajahid. The queen looked over to Arya, who nodded slowly. The queen looked back. Are you against kneeling to those above you? Is she asking if I am impudent? Naruto scoffed. People who believed that royalty was actually real was Naruto didn't even want to get into it. He believed those with power and truly wanted to help the people should be in power. No, your highness. In my land, to kneel is to show loyalty. And while I respect you, I do not submit my will. The queen nodded slowly, as if understanding the difference. Naruto doubted it though. She turned around towards the other elves and spoke. Naruto caught only a bit. Something about opening. Leaf explained to Erogen and Naruto smirked. Later that day, as the elven party raged around them, Naruto found himself sitting in the far corner drinking his sake. Erogen, who was walking around, letting Saphira enjoy her attention, walked over to him. Naruto looked over and smiled. Hey kid, how are you doing? Enjoying the festivities? Erogen nodded, smiling in agreement. But then his smile turned into a confused frown. Why did you not kneel? It seems wrong to go against royalty. Is it different in your lands? Naruto shook his head and motioned for Erogen to sit down next to him. When Erogen did so, Naruto spoke quietly, as if to stop anyone from listening, and royalty means shit in the world. Erogen looked at Naruto, shocked, appalled at the words. What do you mean? They. Naruto raised his hand. Who in battle makes the difference? The person ruling or the fighter? Erogen paused, knowing that once again Naruto was teaching him. The fighter, but do we not owe our allegiance to those in power? I mean, they rule over us and so many people. They take care of the people and country. Naruto shook his head. No, people in power are in power because of what? Bloodline. Money. Because people let them be. Naruto sat back and sighed. It is a very complicated issue, but Naruto paused, drinking his sake. He tried to formulate words so that Erogen could understand. Here. Imagine if the world were made by leaders who had no experience in war, no experience in negotiating. They were chosen because their family was very rich. Erogen nodded. Are you talking about nobles? Naruto laughed at the comment. Yes, indeed he was. Nobles who do not understand not only the will, but the suffering of the people have no place to rule. Leaders, not royalty, should rule. Because for all its glamour, royalty is just another name for a noble. Erogen nodded. But couldn't royalty be a leader? Naruto nodded, thinking about several noble leaders from his home country, the clans, the cages. Yes, of course, but once again Erogen. You need to shatter yourself from blind illusions. Do not take anything for granted. Erogen scratched his head, embarrassed. Then, he noticed Naruto's bottle. What is that? Naruto looked down and chuckled. My sake. It is like your wine, but a bit more stronger. Erogen looked at it curiously, and Naruto already knew what he was going to ask. No, you're not going to try some till much later. Erogen blinked and looked disappointed. Naruto waved his hand and said, I'll give it to you later, after you do a couple things when you need it. Naruto sipped and remembered. Have you answered my question yet? Erogen's jovial face turned a bit serious as he contemplated. When we kill a man we enforce our goals or ideals on others. Therefore. Naruto prodded, he was on an interesting path. We must convince those we can without violence. Because while death is effective, it does nothing but eliminate. To convert would be to gain more allies. Naruto nodded, not what Naruto's ideals held, but it was a very interesting concept. Good. Erogen blinked in surprise. Am I actually right? Erogen couldn't believe it. He was so unsure when he told Auric. Auric had told him it was an ideal like a rider should have, one of pacifism, but not afraid to go to fight. It is your path, not mine. Erogen was now confused. My path. What path did he mean? There had to be several paths, but to what? Naruto took a sip and closed his eyes, relaxing his body. Every person strives towards completion, peace. No two people are alike, so we do not have the same path towards peace. Naruto opened his eyes, turned to Erogen. Paths can intertwine, go against each other, but they all head towards peace. Some paths must destroy others, while some can combine and create a larger path. Erogen contemplated the metaphor. It was so abstract yet held a finality that Erogen couldn't see it described in any other way. Erogen was about to speak when Naruto interrupted. You're going to ask about my path. Erogen closed his mouth and nodded. Naruto gave a wide smile. My path is to eliminate those who have been in war. Erogen's eyes went wide at the words. His mouth opened but no words came out. Naruto, seeing Erogen's confusion and shock, continued with his explanation. Those who have been in war are scarred, burdened. They cannot rule in peace. They become war hawks, paranoid. That is why those who have been in war must pass on that mantle to those who are not scarred by the war, as quickly as possible. Naruto smiled as he drank once more, memories flooding through his mind. This path was created by me and a couple friends. Erogen watched as Naruto's face looked so distant, distracted yet nostalgic. Who were they? Naruto's faint smile turned even fainter. He looked over to Erogen. His face was screaming longing, pain, but Naruto simply said, they are long gone. Erogen closed his mouth and looked away. I am sorry. Naruto patted Erogen on the back, don't worry. I believe you should be partying, not indulging an old war veteran with his stories. Now. Naruto gave a push to Erogen. Go talk with the princess. Naruto said as he pushed Erogen towards Arya, who was walking towards them. Naruto watched as Erogen nodded and walked towards Arya. As he did, Naruto walked out of the building to the sleeping hall where he had been told by one of the elves. When he got there, he would hold a toast to old friends. What if Naruto has dragon inheritance naru x erogen? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.